No, no, I have to tease him once. Mordo finally made a decision. In fact, Modu was still very careful. The strength he bought was basically used to strengthen his body. It can be said that Modu tried his best to stay in Karmatage. This is also what Modu found in the library where he spent a long time. I can indeed use the power of hell now, but Karmatage's black magic is not open to me. Therefore, Modu still strengthened the power he exchanged for his soul to his body. And so, let's fight again. Mordo said this to Jimmy. Come on. To be honest, Jimmy is not a belligerent person. But when someone comes to provoke him, Jimmy will not avoid the battle. Follow me. Modu drew a portal very skillfully. Seeing this, Jimmy didn't hesitate and followed directly. Whether there was an ambush or something, Jimmy didn't really care. In fact, no matter who it is, if there is Overlord heavy equipment that can recover blood during battle, it will be a little inflated. Portal is a very magical spell. Even the apprentices who have just started in Karmatage can go to any place they want by relying on the portal. Therefore, this step is naturally very far away from Karmatage. Entering the portal, the original antique Karmatage has disappeared. Instead, the sky was full of yellow sand. This time, he came directly to the desert. This is also the choice that Modu made after careful consideration. Find a place to duel that no one knows about. Even if you lose, no one will know. That way I won't be too ashamed. Why don't you know how to fight with me even if you meet again? Jimmy felt that the black boy in front of him might have some mental problems. This is already the third time, there is no reason, I have to find myself a duel. In other words, shouldn't Modu be a man with a sense of justice? How did you get here, so determined to win? Are you afraid? Modu held the life court scepter upside down in his hand, and asked Jimmy. I'm bored. Jimmy replied truthfully, it is really troublesome to be entangled by a person inexplicably. How to say? Although it is said that fighting is the fastest way to improve strength, abuse of vegetables cannot be counted among them. Insanity. I have to say that Karmatage is still very much influenced by Far Eastern countries. The people here always speak with some fairy tale flavor. It's just that Jimmy always wanted to laugh when such words came out of a black man's mouth. Seeing that Mordo seemed a little angry, Jimmy still put on a suitable air. This guy has a more dangerous aura. What? The scepter of the Court of Life stretched out step by step, hitting Jimmy on the head. Huh. With a flash step under his feet, Jimmy's face became serious. This guy is so strong. As the saying goes, as soon as an expert makes a move, he will know if there is one. Modu's hard blow just now has almost reached an extreme in terms of strength and speed. Jimmy was even more keenly aware that this Modu seemed to be able to crush him no matter in terms of strength or speed. If the basic attributes are written as data, then Jimmy's attributes are 1, and Modu's attributes are 1.8, or even 2. This is a little scary. This Modu's strength has improved really fast. Once again avoiding Modu's blow, Jimmy seized the flaw and appeared behind Modu in a dodge. Whip legs. Although Modu's basic attributes are much stronger than Jimmy's, the Emperor Jiwu, who is known for his explosive power, can easily explode 10 times or even dozens of times his strength. Oh. Jimmy's legs had intimate contact with Modu's waist. The severe pain was transmitted to Jimmy's mind along the nerves in his legs. And Modu was also kicked about 10 meters away by this powerful force. I go. Jimmy shook his right leg bitterly. This guy, is he on drugs? Shouldn't it be me who cultivates the steel and iron bones? Why is his body stronger than his own? Should it be said that this is a melee mage? It's just a little bit painful, though. Brother, you can do it. Jimmy praised and continued to put on a posture. It has to be said that Jimmy has put away his contempt for Modu, the big brother. Although his right leg has recovered, and although Modu's fighting skills are still so rubbish, Jimmy has already recognized this opponent. An opponent that is not so easy to defeat. Humph. Modu snorted coldly, but a trace of satisfaction flashed in his eyes. The essence of being competitive is to gain the approval of others. And getting the approval of the person who defeated him twice, Modu is undoubtedly happy. However, if you are happy, and Modu will not show mercy. Supreme Mage. I deserve it. Waving the staff in his hand, he threw it at Jimmy again. The bone claws overlapped, firmly parrying Modu's attack. Bone Claw never disappoints Jimmy at any time. However, as the battle escalated, Jimmy was shocked to find that his bone claws couldn't keep up with the rhythm. Although it seemed that the bone claws were still strong, Jimmy could sense that the self-healing factor was at work. The actual situation is that the bone claw can't hold on any longer. For Jimmy, this is undoubtedly bad news. Maybe after practicing for a long time in the future, Jimmy's bone claws will have a qualitative improvement. However, a problem remained in front of Jimmy. That is, with the improvement of Jimmy's strength, the bone claws are already a bit out of place. Woo! Suppressing the anxiety in his heart, Jimmy took a deep breath. Blocking Modu's blow with his claws, Jimmy's figure flashed and started, and the next moment Jimmy had appeared behind Modu. Knee rush. The pure body strength even brought out sparks in the air, and the waist was so severely injured suddenly, Modu flew out of the whole body. Instant kicks. Leaping up high, the strength 100 times stronger than his body brought out a flame in the air. This is not the flame in Jimmy's body, but the flame brought out by the friction generated by Jimmy's body moving at high speed in the air. This kick. Straight to the chest. Seeing Mordo flying out, Jimmy thought about it and gave up the next lightning dance. You can fight, but you can't be killed, right? It's not easy to explain. In this way, Jimmy still doesn't know if Mordo will die. It's also a big load on Jimmy to use the instant chain kick. If it weren't for the self-healing factor, Jimmy wouldn't even be able to stand now. What? Mel stood up abruptly and asked Sams in astonishment. I like you, so I want to challenge you, and I want you to know that I am not weaker than that guy. Samus, the Iceman, said to Mel seriously. That's right, when Jimmy and Mordo were fighting in full swing, Samus also sent an invitation to Mel to fight. This is the decision Sams made after thinking for a long time. Sams is a very confident man. He is so confident that he thinks that only Mel is worthy of him in this world. Before that, Iceman was no match for Jimmy, so he naturally suppressed the impulse in his heart. However, the Iceman who has gained strength will naturally no longer bear it. The first step, of course, is to prove your strength. If Jimmy wasn't here, Sams even wanted to challenge Jimmy. Hearing Sam's words, Mel helplessly stroked his forehead and sighed. This guy. Okay, come on. There was a strong fighting spirit in Mel's eyes. Mel must win this battle. Perhaps in the eyes of Iceman, this is simply to prove his strength to Mel. However, in Mel's eyes, if he loses this battle, then the leadership position he has painstakingly worked on will naturally plummet. This is definitely not the result Mel wants to see. But Sams didn't think of that. For Sams, this may be a very ordinary exchange. As for what Mel is worried about later, won't marrying me solve it? The two came to the training ground and confronted each other, and the people who were training around saw this and moved away from here. But they sat down in a safe place. Obviously, these people, who are either new members or old members, also want to know which one is stronger, the Queen or the Iceman. The news spread quickly, and even Magneto and other high-level officials rushed over. Under the eyes of everyone, a little bit of cold air began to rise, which is the usual method of the Iceman. The cold environment will have a greater impact on most mutants. However, this time, the Iceman chose the wrong opponent. The chill in the air could not only have no negative impact on Mel. It even became the source of Mel's energy. Of course, Mel wouldn't be foolish enough to make fun of it. It's over. Mel didn't move. Mel knew about the Iceman. Jimmy had told Mel about this. It is very simple to play with ice. Moreover, Sams should have lost to Jimmy. So since Iceman wants to prove his strength in front of himself, then, he must be confident that he can beat Jimmy. If this is the case, this game is really not easy to fight. Mel already had a general understanding of the current situation. Therefore, Mel intends to respond to all changes with the same. And similar to Mel, Sams also knew Mel's ability. Energy absorption coupled with teleportation. To be honest, before Samus got the power of the devil, he really didn't have the confidence to defeat Mel. But now it's different. This time, Samus not only got the power of the devil, but also got a magic weapon from hell. Eternal Ice. It is a very powerful magic weapon, and it can be regarded as the top one in the whole hell. Perhaps it is weaker than the EYUE that Jimmy got from the son of the Crypt Lord, but it is only weaker. And in terms of strengthening the ice system, this Eternal Ice is almost the strongest. Of course, Sams also paid a full 80.00% of his soul for this and promised Mephisto two things. Kill Wolverine. There is no doubt that Jimmy has been on Mephisto's must-kill list. And in order to achieve such a goal, Mephisto can't help but spare no effort to improve Samus. And another thing. The surrounding air is still continuously decreasing, and the energy absorbed by Mel is also constantly approaching Mel's upper limit. A hot flame began to condense in Mel's hands. This was done to consume the excess energy in his body. Also to prepare for the attack. Although in such an environment, using ice would be better, but Mel didn't think he could beat Sam's at what Sam's was best at. Time passed slowly, and the flame in Mel's hand slammed towards Sam's. However, this group of flames was slowly exhausted in midair. This attack didn't seem to work. Sam stood where he was and didn't move, didn't speak or do anything to provoke Mel. Sam's didn't forget his purpose, he hoped to catch Mel. It's not just to win this game. Even, Sam's is ready. If Mel doesn't make a move, then Sam's will consume Mel to death like this. Minutes passed by. Mel's brows were even covered with frost. Finally, Mel couldn't bear it anymore, his figure flashed, and Mel appeared in front of Sam's in the next moment. As if throwing himself into a hug, Mel plunged into Sam's arms. However, this action, which looks like throwing himself into his arms, contains a great danger. This trick is called Tai Shenjiao. From Jimmy. Naturally, Sam's also felt the danger, and his face changed suddenly, but Sam's did not choose to dodge. It was impossible to dodge at Samus's speed. I just felt the surrounding temperature drop sharply again. Even the ground was covered with a sheet of ice. And Mel's figure was also frozen in front of Sam's. Woo! With a sigh of relief, Sam's quickly put away the ice. After a long time, it would be a great joy if Mel died here. Samus needs a living Mel. Not one dead. The solid ice disappeared, and Mel's body fell limply. Samus's eyes moved, and he reached out to hold Mel in his arms. However, at the moment when Mel was about to be hugged, Mel's figure quickly left in front of Sam's. Kyle's figure appeared here, and he gave Sam's a cold look. Kyle left here with his sister. Looking at Mel, who was carried away by Kyle, Sam's didn't have hatred in his eyes, but a little helplessness flashed. Brother, why did your body suddenly become so good? At the same time, Jimmy was helping the seriously injured Modu to walk towards the portal step by step. There is a magic that confused steel into my body, and I used this magic. Modu said what he had prepared a long time ago. Then go back and find that book for us. After stepping through the portal, the two have arrived at Kamatage. Sensing all kinds of gazes from around him, Modu fell silent. What about the one who was supposed to be cruel to Jimmy? How did you become ashamed of yourself again? Fortunately, Modu has experienced it several times. It's a habit. Moreover, this time I at least found out Jimmy's background. Modu also knew that he was basically lacking in fighting skills. Are you sure you want to practice? This is not the full version of mine. Modu frowned and asked Jimmy. Kamatage really has such a forbidden technique. Modu also wanted to practice, and even prepared a lot of rare metals in order to practice this forbidden technique. For example, Wakanda's vibration gold, these metals are stored in Modu. However, in the end Mordo gave up. This forbidden technique is different from other forbidden techniques. Other forbidden techniques are because they hurt the sky and were banned by the ancient seal. However, this secret technique was because it was too cruel to him. Integrate rare metals into one's own body, integrate with one's own cells, and even one's soul. It is said that no one has ever succeeded. Even the mage who created this forbidden technique back then died in this technique. Even for Jimmy, it is not a simple matter to succeed in cultivation. The two came to the library, and under Modu's guidance, Jimmy easily obtained this technique. Let's take a look first. If you dare to practice, I will give you all the materials. Mordo patted Jimmy on the shoulder, turned around and limped away. This book has not been collected by Gu Yi, and even this technique may be the only magic that Gu Yi has not mastered. There is a self-study room in the library, and Jimmy is very serious about it. Tisk tisk tisk. About 2 hours later, Jimmy closed the book. This technique is called the immortal body of Vajra. A technique with a very oriental name. Its upper limit is that there is no upper limit. He can decompose metal into a special particle that can fuse with the cells and soul in the body, thus forming another substance. This substance has both the growth of organic life and the hardness of metal. It can be said that this is a very strong technique. The person who developed this technique is definitely a genius. However, Jimmy can't practice this skill now. There is no other reason. There is no doubt that Jimmy has a self-healing factor in his body. However, Jimmy's soul does not have a self-healing factor. And this Vajra is not bad in the process of cultivation. The body and soul are fused at the same time. This process cannot be interrupted and cannot be reversed. It can be said that if Jimmy is practicing now, his body will have a self-healing factor, and Jimmy will have no problems at all. However, there is a real possibility of a complete breakdown of the soul. In the words of the East, it means that the soul flies away and the soul is scattered. Then, Jimmy will only have an extremely strong body left. But what good is that? So, how did Modu practice? Jimmy couldn't figure it out for a moment, looked at the books on the table, and then at his bone claws. Jimmy's heart began to struggle. Give it a try and turn a bicycle into a motorcycle? Do you want to practice this technique now? A voice suddenly appeared in Jimmy's ears, and he was shocked. He turned around and found that it was Ji Yi. Jimmy didn't speak, but even if Jimmy didn't speak, Ji Yi understood what Jimmy meant. Sometimes, silence is an attitude. You are not good enough now, you can read the 3 books I prepared for you first. Ji Yu said with a smile. You mean the unity of man and nature? Jimmy didn't think of it at first, but after Ji Yi's point, he suddenly remembered that one of the 3 books that Ji Yi prepared for himself was about the soul. That is, the unity of man and nature. The same name is very oriental. But here he is not a state, but like the indestructible body of the Vajra, it is a passive skill. As we all know, like Jimmy, the soul must be much weaker than the body. Even Jimmy, whose soul is out of his body, can only defeat the esteem who has no shield and can't hang up. The role of harmony between man and nature is to coordinate the ability of body and soul. After successful cultivation, with every gesture, you can directly hit the soul of the enemy. After the soul leaves the body, the soul also possesses all the capabilities of the body. The process of cultivation is to integrate the soul and the body into one, and then separate the soul from the body. In this way, the body has the characteristics of the soul, and the soul has the characteristics of the body. After cultivating to great success, you can shoot out the soul of the enemy with one palm, just like the ancient Hulk. This is not only for those who are weaker than oneself, even for those who are similar to oneself. Every move will cause great trouble to the enemy. The 2 techniques, the unity of man and nature, are easy to learn but difficult to master. The indestructible body of King Kong belongs to the threshold is too high, but if you cross the threshold, you will be very successful. But for Jimmy, they have to come one by one in order. Cultivate well, I have all the materials I need here. Ji Yi smiled and said to Jimmy. After seeing Jimmy's future in the time gem, Ancient One began to collect information. It took a full 4 years and traveled through countless latitudes before Ji Yi gathered this material. Teacher, why are you so nice to me? Jimmy didn't ask what it meant. Something that could catch Gu's eyes must not be weak. But Jimmy is very puzzled, why Ji Yi treats him so well. I got the Eye of Agamotto for myself, and I found a set of spells for myself. Even the materials for practicing spells have been prepared for myself. This made Jimmy a little uncomfortable for a while. It's some compensation for you. Ji Yi bowed his head in silence for a long time, and said in a low voice. Protect the earth, become the supreme mage, and take charge of the Eye of Agamotto. It looks very glamorous, but only Ji Yi, the person involved, knows the sadness in it. After reaching this step, can she really wake up and take power in the world? Do not make jokes. The staring eyes of different latitudes on the earth have never disappeared. Devour other latitudes to improve your own latitude. This is a higher level of the law of the jungle. Ji Yi can even imagine how the earth will be treated when he can no longer hold on. In the face of attacks from other latitudes, even Asgard, which takes protecting the stability of the 9 realms as its own responsibility, will not guard the weak atrium? If not necessary, the earth still needs a tyrannical guardian. Negotiating terms with the Eyes of Agamotto is really unsatisfactory. The teacher is not afraid of me. You will do it, won't you? Ji Yi looked at Jimmy tenderly. Those eyes that should have been calm, seemed to see through Jimmy at this moment. Of course. Jimmy nodded, agreeing to the responsibility given to him by Ji Yi. The earth is particularly fragile in the eyes of those demon gods. In the face of all the demon gods who are eager to watch, the earth needs a guardian. Jimmy doesn't want to belong to the guarded one, if he can. Why did Jimmy focus on the Eye of Agamotto? It is to stop the actions of Thanos. In fact, Jimmy doesn't need to be so tired at all. With Jimmy's current ability, he can definitely strive for a superior life for himself in society. However, Jimmy didn't want to pin his hopes on others. Therefore, the goal Jimmy set for himself is to master at least 3 infinite gems and use them proficiently. Only in this way can Jimmy live in peace. And now, I have got the first infinity gem, the time gem. Not only that, but he also received all-round training from Ji. There is nothing in the world that can be taken for nothing. Now that you have taken it, you have to pay for it yourself. As Ji said, in this position, Jimmy can only assume this responsibility. There is no room for choice. Could it be that Jimmy became the supreme mage and could watch all kinds of weird guys from other latitudes rule the earth? No, Jimmy can't do it. Of course, some people might be able to do it, but definitely not Jimmy. It is this characteristic of Jimmy that Ji likes. Others can be cultivated slowly, Ji still has time. How's the training in the mirror space going? Ji shook his head with a smile. The smile on his face gradually disappeared and became a little serious. Quite some teachers test the meaning of students. Of course I learned it, and it's not difficult. Jimmy said it was very easy. After solving the introduction to Karma-Taj magic, Jimmy felt that other magic theories were very simple. Especially when mind energy and arcane energy can complement each other, Jimmy has perfectly mastered the three-piece suit of Master Karma-Taj. Out of body, portals and mirror spaces. Oh, use it on me. Ji smiled and nodded. For Jimmy's talent, Ji has no doubts at all. Ji knew very early on that the only problem Karma-Taj had with Jimmy was how to use magic. When this hurdle has been passed, then this disciple will grow up at the fastest speed. Hearing this, Jimmy took a deep breath. The secret energy in his body gathered at his fingertips, and he stretched out his hand towards the air in front of him. Crack. The place that was supposed to be empty suddenly made a sound like a broken mirror. And a broken hole appeared in the originally empty air. It seems that it is waiting for someone who is not afraid of death to enter. I ask you to use it on me. Ji glanced at the entrance of the mirror space that Jimmy created and said lightly. Such a mirror space has no practical value at all. Maybe it's a good choice to escape. He looked at the entrance in front of him, and then at Ji. How to drag the enemy into the mirror space is indeed a problem. It seems that no one told me, so, if this is the case. The mysterious energy in the body gathered on the right fist, and he swung it forward violently, and the sound of clicking and clicking was heard endlessly. After this punch, the place where Ji was standing, including the place where he was standing, became the entrance of the mirrored space. In this way, Ji can naturally be dragged into the mirror space. It seems that Karma-Taj's magic didn't teach you what skills are. Looking at the surrounding environment, Ji said with a sigh. For some reason, Ji suddenly remembered the demon god who died in his hands 500 years ago. It's the same as my current disciples, too hard. It's a pity that the difference between that one and my disciple is that one doesn't have a self-healing factor. Hey. Hearing Ji's words, Jimmy scratched his head in embarrassment for a moment. Skills are something, Jimmy still prefers to punch out like this. Anyway, it's all resolved. In fact, Emperor Jiwu doesn't have any skills. Perhaps the most technical one is Tishan. Others are like Flash Step, Instant Shadow Chain Kick, and even the last extremely martial Overlord Kick. The principle is very simple: concentrate the power on one point, hit it out, and it's done. If it is said that the master is specialized in the study of strength. Nian Huang specializes in studying Nian Qi. Poison God is specialized in studying how to hide people. Then, Emperor Jiwu specializes in studying how to die. 100 times the basic attribute exploded in an instant. Is this something that people do? This can catch up with the blessing of the 8 gates of Dunjia Death Gate, right? Although you have talents that ordinary people cannot possess, I still hope that you will use your brain more. Ji came in front of Jimmy, patted Jimmy on the shoulder, and hesitated for a long time before saying such a sentence. Okay, I get it. Jimmy nodded to show he understood. In fact, Jimmy also really wants to change Jiwawang's fighting skills. It is called fighting skills, but in fact, there is no skill at all. Jiwawang's skill is to do his best to ensure that every punch is his strongest blow, the most extreme blow. It's powerful, but it's also loaded. But it's just that he has this idea. If he really wants to change the inheritance of Emperor Wu, then Jimmy needs to reach the peak on this road first. You can be regarded as an official mage now, so you need to have a magic weapon that belongs to you. Ji opened a golden portal and walked in slowly. A gleam of joy flashed in Jimmy's eyes. Tisk, magical artifact. The legendary spiritual one. Just thinking about it makes me a little excited. Stepping into the portal, Jimmy saw a variety of strange objects. Different from the ones in the movie, there are many magical artifacts here, and there are also many types, such as armor, weapons, clothes, cups. All kinds of magical instruments are filled with something similar to glass. These are magical artifacts made by some seniors and left after the demon gods of different latitudes were killed. Go and choose one that suits you. Ji Yi looked at these things with a look of pride in his eyes. These are the most precious wealth accumulated by Karmatage from generation to generation. Okay. After hearing Ji Yi's words, Jimmy couldn't wait to rush in. The first thing that appeared in front of Jimmy was a pair of gloves. Gloves are the most suitable equipment for the martial emperor. However, this pair of gloves does not seem to be very interested in Jimmy. Forehead, with some reluctance to leave the gloves, Jimmy began to try them one by one. In fact, it is not so much that Jimmy chooses the magic weapon, it is better to say that the magic weapon chooses Jimmy. Tried one by one, being hit again and again. Before he knew it, Jimmy came to the last magic weapon. This doesn't seem to be one piece, it should be a set to be precise. This is a suit that looks like a martial arts uniform, except that the cuffs that are supposed to be wide have a wrist guard. The whole body is pure white, and the edges and corners of the clothes are dotted with golden patterns. Looks like it's selling well. Of course, appearance is not the most prominent feature of this magic weapon. What is important is that this magic weapon is different from other magic weapons. Jimmy found that he and this magic weapon finally had a little bit of soul speculation. As if knowing that Jimmy had chosen his magic weapon, the glass cover outside the martial arts uniform slowly disappeared, and this martial arts uniform was also worn on Jimmy's body. Fits well. This is Jimmy's first feeling. Lackey's martial arts suit is a very good magic weapon. It has a very comprehensive auxiliary function. It can also increase the weight through the energy you input, so as to assist your cultivation. Ji Yi saw the martial arts uniform on Jimmy, and the corners of his eyes twitched involuntarily. The black hair hangs loosely on the white martial arts uniform, and the fair skin and the white martial arts uniform set off each other. In Ji Yi's eyes, the originally beautiful picture overlapped with the figure of that fellow lackey. Lackey is a demon god, a very pure demon god. He has been pursuing the ultimate in martial arts all his life, and there is nothing in front of him that cannot be broken by a single punch. This martial arts uniform has brought great effects to Lackey, whether it is in training or in battle. Absorbing energy, reflecting energy, and transforming energy into form, this is a very rare artifact. Without this piece of clothing, Larch would have been killed by a second-rate mage flying a kite long ago. In fact, Lackey challenged many opponents and won all of them until he met Ji Yi. The collision between Lackey's martial uniform and the Eye of Agamotto ended with the Eye of Agamotto's victory. And Lackey also fell on the road to challenge. Jimmy could feel that when he put on the clothes again, he seemed to have established a connection with the clothes. Through this connection, I seem to be able to transmit the thought energy in my body. Do as soon as you think about it, compared to the small amount of secret energy, after several years of daily practice, although the mind energy in the body is not too much, it is definitely not too little. With the influx of thoughts, the martial arts suit seems to have undergone some different changes. Of course, it can't be seen from the outside, but Jimmy's feeling is that this dress can realize all his ideas. As soon as the faith moved, a pair of extremely gorgeous wings appeared behind it. This is the wing that Jimmy thought of in a third-rate online game in his previous life. Unexpectedly, it actually appeared. I go, something. As if sensing Jimmy's inner surprise, the martial arts uniform seemed to have some reaction. It gives Jimmy the feeling that this dress seems to be proud of it. As if instinctively, the newly appeared wings began to flap slowly like a look in the eyes of Jimmy's body. And Jimmy's figure also began to rise into the air continuously, and between the flapping of the wings, a strong wind pressure was generated. The small secret room was suddenly filled with strong winds. The stature continued to rise, and a light door appeared without warning. The next moment, Jimmy had disappeared into the secret room. Ji Yi followed, and when the figures of the two disappeared, the door of light also disappeared into the small secret room. The change of scene made Jimmy retract the wings behind his back. This seems to be the highest place in the entire Karmatage. Standing here, the entire Karmatage can be said to be unobstructed. And here, there is a big clock. Boom, boom, boom. 9 times in a row, Jimmy looked at Ji Yi in astonishment. The clock strikes 9, implying an urgent assembly. What's wrong with this? Faced with Jimmy's puzzled eyes, Ji Yi didn't say anything to explain. He took 2 steps forward, stopped half a meter in front of Jimmy, and looked down at the golden light gates that appeared one after another down the mountain. Modu also came to the back of Gyuyi, and stood with Jimmy on the left and right about half a meter behind Gyuyi. Today, Jimmy finally knows what the Supreme Mage means. What kind of power is behind the Supreme Mage? A dense crowd of mages appeared in front of Jimmy. Looking around, there are huge crowds of people, roughly estimated to be at least tens of thousands. I never thought there were so many people in Karmatage. Should it be said that it is a magic church that utilizes space to the extreme? Standing on the high roof, Gyuyi solemnly looked at the mages below. It looked like there were a lot of people, but most of them were students. Their combat effectiveness is not very high, and their main role is in charge of logistics. Set off. Gyuyi waved his hand at the crowd, a huge space passage appeared, and he walked into it first. Jimmy and Modu naturally followed behind Gyuyi, and behind Jimmy and Modu were those mages. The space channel is the space channel, and one side is the antique Karmatage. After stepping over with one foot, it turned into an endless prairie. If you ignore the equally dark enemies on the prairie, this is undoubtedly a very suitable place for outings. Teacher, what are we? Jimmy really couldn't bear the doubts in his heart, and asked Gyuyi his inner question. Isn't that obvious enough? War. I see. It means that there are two options: kill them or be killed by them. The orcs of Azeroth, their reproductive ability is too strong, and they will attack the earth almost every few decades. Gyuyi explained a sentence lightly. Then there are no other forces in Azeroth? Yes, but if they go to war with other forces in this world, they may be exterminated. The number is large, but the quality has gone down. Gyuyi is also happy to explain his disciples' doubts. This can be regarded as a form of entertainment, right? Then he started a war with us. Isn't he afraid that we will rush into their latitude? Don't be kidding. Here, we are facing an orc race. There are 3 other races in Azeroth, and the orc race is just one of them. After listening to Gyuyi's words, Jimmy fell silent. Stinky and shameless orcs. What you see is not the elite of the orc clan. Most of them are old, weak, sick and disabled. It's just because the clan doesn't have enough resources. So they're just trying to drain the population pressure? Jimmy frowned and asked, such a method is too disgusting. Of course not, this is just the vanguard. If we are at a disadvantage, we must face their elites. Gyuyi looked at the orcs in front of him and said so. Then why don't they hit the earth directly? Magic enchantment. As Gyuyi's voice fell, a high-pitched horn sounded. The orcs launched the first round of charge. Mel is very bad right now. After losing the battle with Sams, Mel's right to speak can be said to have plummeted. This is different from Jimmy defeating himself. Although Jimmy defeated himself, Jimmy is his own. And what about Sams? Just a good friend. Moreover, Mel, who is naturally arrogant, tasted the taste of failure once again, and unsurprisingly, a strange feeling rose in his heart. Helpless, confused. When I failed, I looked back, only to find that the only person who was still with me was my sister. When are you coming back? Mel leaned back on the bed, staring out the window with blank eyes. Well, we'll be in touch every day. Dong dong dong. At this time, Mel's door was knocked. Who? As Mel spoke, he opened the door. When I opened the door, it was Sam's. The first round of the charge of the orcs began, and it seemed that they were all made up of old, weak, sick and disabled troops. However, Jimmy could also vaguely see that there were many normal troops mixed with these old, weak, sick and disabled. Obviously, the orcs still have ambitions. Prepare. Gyuyi raised his hand high, and the mages behind him also started to prepare. Even Mordo started the prelude to casting the spell, but Jimmy stood there stupidly, not knowing what to do. Gyu glanced at Jimmy but didn't say much. This time I brought Jimmy to get acquainted. Start. With an order, many portals appeared in the middle of the camp of the Wolf Knights who were rushing towards their own camp. In front of them sprinting, countless portals appeared in a row. All of a sudden, the entire sprint formation was completely disrupted. The one who was charging ahead suddenly appeared behind his teammates. The long knife that was supposed to tear apart the enemy's formation pierced into the body of his teammates without any hindrance. Gyuyi looked at the scene in front of him. There was no wave in Gyu Jing's eyes. Gyuyi has seen such a scene more than 100 times. The red light in the eyes began to converge, and after a little power accumulation, it shot out fiercely. Eye of Destruction in Saratok. Red laser beams filled the already chaotic battlefield in an instant. In less than 1 minute, the charge of the orcs was dissolved invisibly. This damn woman. The leader was an old man with white hair, riding on a burly wolf. This is the leader of this orc attack. Is an orc prophet in his twilight years. Similar to the mages of Karmatage, they all belong to the kind of dual cultivation of magic and martial arts. It's just that compared to Karmatage, who is closer to a battle mage, this prophet is more inclined to a magician. The staff in his hand can explain everything. Retreat. The prophet's staff was raised high. Although he was old, his voice was still full of confidence. Today was just a test, when it was discovered that Karmatage's tactics hadn't changed much. The prophet immediately ordered the retreat. Karmatage is quite famous among all latitudes. Although Karmatage's battle mage doesn't look very strong. But if you fight alone, the mage of Karmatage can easily overwhelm an Asgard warrior. Ancient One is not weaker than Odin's woman. And in this battle formation, Karmatage's mages are notoriously difficult to fight. Space magic. This is really a particularly disgusting magic. No matter how strong your attack is, no matter how fast you are, if you can't hit the enemy, it's useless. The prophet knew very well in his heart that this war was actually to find a place for himself, the old, the weak, the sick and the disabled. Compared with dying on the bed, not many resources are consumed. It would be better to die on the battlefield. It is also a rare honor. Gu Yi also understood this truth very well, and directly turned such a war of attrition into a training ground for mage Karmatage. Under normal circumstances, after experiencing such a battle, mages will more or less improve. In terms of loss, it is not too much. Simply put, it is the exchange of quantity for quality. Although Karmatage is not poor, its resources are not endless. Camp. With a wave of Gyuda's hand, the passage connecting the two latitudes was closed. The mages began to set up camp one after another. This kind of work is done by specialized people. In terms of food, it is easy to find ingredients on the prairie. In short, this is like an exercise with live ammunition. The purpose is to keep the mages of Karmatage maintaining sufficient combat effectiveness. Looking at these mages, Jimmy really couldn't understand why Karmatage looked so weak in the later stage. The supreme mage who holds the Eye of Agamotto can't even beat the Whisperer, one of the 5 generals of Obsidian. Is it too low? Dormammu knows he will cry, okay? With the mages that Jimmy has seen so far and the Ancient One, it is not difficult to hang Thanos at all. Even if he wrestles with Asgard, there is no problem. Jimmy. Just when Jimmy was thinking wildly, Gu Yi appeared beside Jimmy. Teacher. Jimmy bowed respectfully and saluted. Jimmy respected Gu Yi quite a lot. This battle will last for almost 2 years. During this period, will it be difficult to learn the unity of man and nature? Gu Yi asked Jimmy Gujing nonchalantly, but the expression of Modu who was following Gu Yi changed. No problem. But neither Gu Yi nor Jimmy cared about Modu. Did you see that camp? After getting Jimmy's answer, Gu Yi nodded in satisfaction, stretched out his hand and pointed, and a camp of orcs appeared in Jimmy's eyes. Saw. Jimmy froze for a moment, indicating that he had seen it. 1 month, destroy him, whatever method you use. How many people for me? Jimmy didn't refuse when he heard the words. Since it was a battlefield, he would naturally have to play. Moreover, Jimmy didn't think he would die here. Unless someone can knock himself into an atomic state in an instant, otherwise, it shouldn't be a big problem. There are not many people, only you. I see. Jimmy nodded when he heard the words, and walked towards the camping place. It's getting late now, and I need to hurry up and take a rest. Yes, Jimmy just wanted to go straight to work tonight. As for complaining or anything, Jimmy didn't mention it at all. Even if Jimmy is really given a team, Jimmy doesn't know how these mages who shine as soon as they fight will complete the infiltration. As for the positive side, why not just let Gu Yi lead everyone to rush in? Looking at Jimmy's disappearing back, Gu Yi showed an inexplicable smile at the corner of his mouth. For such a task, Gu Yi is to give Jimmy a special training. Although Jimmy seems to be very powerful now, it is far from meeting Gu Yi's expectations. Originally, Gu Yi planned to train Slantage, but now that there is a better Jimmy, Gu Yi will not let it go. What's more, I still have more time now, so I can slowly cultivate it. Negotiation is a good way, but Gu Yi hopes that this way will become an option. But now, Gu Yi hopes that Jimmy can find his own shortcomings in the constant battle, and then come to him for advice. Relatively speaking, Ancient One still hoped that his successor would be in existence that could resist the pressure of all parties. Jimmy. Jimmy, who was walking on the road, stopped and looked back suspiciously. You also participated in the battle. It was Nancy who appeared in front of him. Of course, except for the guardians of the three major temples who did not participate in the battle, the entire Karma-Taj participated in the battle. Nancy heard the words and explained. Then you have to pay attention to your own safety. Jimmy nodded upon hearing this, and continued to walk forward. Just received the number plate, Jimmy can already vaguely see his own dormitory. HMPH. I thought you would protect me. How could Nancy let Jimmy leave so easily? After a few trots, he caught up with Jimmy. It's just that it's easy to pull in the distance between the bodies, but it's very difficult mentally. Jimmy didn't respond to Nancy's words, and Jimmy really didn't know how to respond to this flirtatious coquetry. Hi. You haven't eaten yet, have you? Seeing that Jimmy ignored her, Nancy yelled at Jimmy angrily. I've already eaten, I still have something to go out later, you can eat by yourself. Jimmy paused, turned around and said something, and walked quickly back to his residence. Looking at Jimmy going away, Nancy did not follow up again, and stood a little disappointed for a while, and Nancy came to an open space. The moist eye sockets showed the owner's mood at this time. Nancy felt that she really couldn't stand it anymore, and every time her enthusiasm got such a response. Nancy wanted to give up several times, but she couldn't bear to give up. If he succeeds, then Jimmy will treat other girls in the same way, right? What? Failed again? Don't think about him, there are quite a lot of men in Karma-Taj. A girl quietly appeared behind Nancy. Heather really couldn't understand why Nancy insisted on pursuing that Jimmy. Could it be because both of them have a mixed face? There are many boys like Karma-Taj. Although Jimmy is very powerful, he defeated the big brother Modu as soon as he came. However, Nancy's talent is also very good, and she will definitely be a very strong mage in the near future. Why do you have to go after that guy? I like his specificity and his gentleness. When Nancy heard the words, she said it without hesitation. You call that tenderness? I feel that you may have misunderstood the term tenderness. Heather said with a look of disbelief. He taught me a lot of things. Upon hearing this, Nancy turned her head and said firmly to her best friend. You tell me, what is Jimmy to our Karma-Taj? Everyone's dream lover, recognized as the next supreme mage. Then, why should the supreme mage of Karma-Taj be touched by a woman who doesn't know where? Nancy's words were so firm, she convinced Heather, and also convinced herself. And Jimmy also returned to the place where he lived. It looks like a tent on the outside, but when you walk in, you can find something different. It looks like a small tent on the outside, but it has more than 100 square meters inside. People have to sigh the convenience of space magic. At this time, a sharp long knife condensed out of Jimmy's hand. Looking at his shoulder, Jimmy chopped it off without hesitation. Forehead. A burst of severe pain came, and a big hole was directly torn in Larch's martial arts uniform, and a hideous wound appeared on Jimmy's arm. I don't know if it was because the main artery was cut, but there was not much bleeding, and the wound healed quickly. At the same time, Jimmy also felt the negativity from the dress. The thoughts in the body surged, and the wound on the clothes quickly became perfect. It made Jimmy look sideways. This dress is okay. Jimmy mainly wanted to test the performance of this garment. Now it looks better than expected. Jimmy doesn't really need the defense power of this dress. Relatively speaking, using mind energy to improve defense power is better than letting the self-healing factor heal itself. The thoughts in his hands surged, and a throbbing thunder appeared in Jimmy's hands. Looking at his arm, Jimmy pressed it directly. Without feeling any discomfort, the energy was directly absorbed by the clothes. This was a bit beyond Jimmy's expectations. It seemed that he felt Jimmy's surprise, and the martial arts uniform also conveyed a proud mood to Jimmy. He wanted to keep trying, but Jimmy stopped. Surely you haven't eaten, right? I brought it here for you. Familiar voice, heartwarming gesture. Who else but Nancy? Thank you. After hesitating for a long time, Jimmy still couldn't say anything more hurtful. It's okay. What are you going to do next? Can I help? Putting the lunchbox on the table in front of Jimmy, Nancy stared at Jimmy with a pair of big watery eyes. Well. You can't help, the teacher gave me a test. Jimmy thought about it and still didn't tell the truth, otherwise the girl would ask questions again. As night fell, Jimmy quietly approached the orc tribe. In fact, Jimmy is not very good at sneaking in, but Jimmy still plans to give it a try. Even for the success of this infiltration, Jimmy specially put on a black cloak over his martial arts uniform. Otherwise, the white gold-rimmed martial arts uniform would be too conspicuous. The endless prairie was shrouded in darkness, and a pitch-black mass of Jimmy began to cautiously move towards the base camp of the orcs. But did not find a pair of eyes hidden in the darkness. Monitor the guards. This is a method commonly used by the orcs. In fact, it is useless to face the mage of Kamatage. However, it is still used habitually. And Anthony, the leader of the orc camp, didn't expect that such a method would really work. What is this for? Is it convenient to use the portal to observe the terrain? No, supposedly GUE alone should be able to bring all the mages here. What does this guy do? Anthony looked suspiciously at the screen sent back by the monitoring guard. Let him in and kill him. Anthony said to his cronies that, as the former sword master of the orc clan, even though Anthony was old, he still had enough confidence in himself. Can't beat GUE, can't beat your apprentice? Jimmy soon came around the orc camp. Even in the dark, Jimmy can easily see. There are 2 watchtowers at the entrance of the camp, and 2 orcs are on guard on each tower. Leaning against the wall of the camp, Jimmy began to think about whether he had any means to kill these 4 orcs silently. Okay. A cloud of golden thoughts condensed in Jimmy's hands. With one hand pinching the black cloak to block the continuously emitting golden light. This is Jimmy's only means of long-range attack at present. Although he came to Kamatage to learn magic, Jimmy still doesn't have any remote means. I have to say, this is a very embarrassing thing. After hesitating again and again, Jimmy still dissipated the thoughts in his hands. What's up? Suddenly, with a flash of inspiration, Jimmy thought of a way. Carefully observe the 4 orcs, constantly observing every detail of their bodies. Jimmy put on the hanging ring in both hands, and the mysterious energy in his body instantly condensed. 2 portals instantly appeared on the 2 watchtowers, and 4 ferocious heads appeared beside Jimmy. A portal covered 2 orcs. This move was perfect. Tightening the cloak on his body, Jimmy tiptoed inside. Sniff sniff, sniff sniff, as he walked, Jimmy twitched his nose. With all kinds of smells gathering, Jimmy is carefully distinguishing the smells that are useful to him. Suddenly, Jimmy dodged and hid behind a catapult. Not long after, I saw a patrol team of about 20 people walking past the catapult. After the team passed by, Jimmy slowly sneaked into the center of the camp. There was the smell of gasoline. It should be used on the catapults of the orcs, and the Ancient One orcs only have this level of technology. Prepare. In the big camp, Anthony drew out his curved knife and led a group of people eager to try. Is it that simple? Looking at the warehouse close at hand, Jimmy's eyes flashed with relief. Without going any further, a flame appeared in Jimmy's hands. It was the fire that Jimmy warmed day and night. Jimmy didn't want to experience the power of gasoline being detonated. Just cast spells from a distance. Just when the flame has condensed and is about to launch. An unprecedented sense of crisis appeared. Jimmy's pupils shrank suddenly, and he started to dodge steps. At the same time, the flame in his hand drew a beautiful landscape in the night sky. Pung. With a soft sound, a figure flew out backwards. Take a closer look. Who else could it be if it wasn't Anthony? Anthony used to be the sword master of the orc clan, but he was old and frail, and his reflexes couldn't keep up with Jimmy's rhythm. Being hit by this sudden counterattack, he was instantly knocked into the air. In fact, neither the Juggernaut nor the Prophet is the opponent of GUE. Even if they are at their peak, they are only at the level of Thor. They are old and frail. Whether they can defeat this team is a question. But there is obviously not only one Anthony here, there are many orc soldiers. Although it was embarrassing to be beaten by Jimmy, Anthony quickly appeared in front of Jimmy. At this time, the soldiers of the orc tribe had surrounded the 2 of them, and Anthony held swords in both hands in front of his chest. Ah. Looking at Anthony, who was waiting in full battle, Jimmy sighed helplessly. I knew it wouldn't go so smoothly. Legs slightly bent, standing sideways, light toes, heels off the ground, left fist to protect the left face, right fist ready to go. This is a commonly used fighting style in Sonda. The 2 sides held their breath and stared at each other. Jimmy was waiting for Anthony to make the first move. As long as Anthony made the move, Jimmy could quickly find Anthony's flaws. This is the horror of weakness perception. The long sword was raised slowly, and then fell suddenly. Jimmy didn't know why. His face was solemn, and he didn't know what Anthony meant by such a move. If you swing your sword in place, you can't cut me down, can you? However, with Anthony yelling, Jimmy knew what it meant. On. I saw that with Anthony's loud shout, the the surrounding orc soldiers surrounded Jimmy one after another. Big. Seeing this, Jimmy cursed, but he had no choice but to go up. The combat effectiveness of these orc soldiers is really not very good. Probably just a little bit better than ordinary people, not even as good as those little devils that Jimmy met back then. The weapons in his hands were not very good either. The bone claws with high-temperature flames would easily break into two as soon as they touched them. It can almost be said that every time a shot is taken, one or even more soldiers will lose their lives. But how many people are in this camp? The battle continued for a long time, until the last orc soldier fell. Among the countless corpses, Jimmy was half kneeling in tatters. The originally fashionable and brand new martial arts uniform was full of holes. Jimmy's blood-scabby skin was exposed. Of course, it's all the blood of the enemy. The sky was getting brighter, and after nearly a night of fighting, although Jimmy didn't die, he was exhausted enough. Sitting on the ground, Jimmy looked at Anthony in front of him, showing 2 rows of white teeth. Successful infiltration. Anthony looked at Jimmy in front of him, and was speechless for a while. Hey. A happy smile appeared on Jimmy's bloody face. The 2 rows of neat and white teeth formed a sharp contrast with the dark red bloodstains. Old man, I'm only 1 short of you from my successful infiltration. Anthony's eyes kept flickering, and finally he raised the sword that accompanied him all his life, ready to fight. At this time, Jimmy's body has long since lost the mind energy, let alone the secret energy, but it doesn't matter. It can be said that there are only a handful of places where Emperor Jiwu can use Neonki. A golden white flame ignited on the dark red bone claws, and the temperature made the surrounding air begin to distort. This thing does not consume energy. There is no shelf, and no flash step is used. His hands hang down naturally, and he keeps a certain distance from his body with a little force. Jimmy walked towards Anthony step by step. Step by step, not light or heavy, but it seems that every step is stepping on Anthony's heart. The bright silver blade dances in the air like a butterfly wearing flowers. I'll fuck you. With a loud shout, Jimmy didn't bother to care about any routines. The bone claws carrying golden baize flames went straight to grab the veteran. With the long sword on the block, countless soldiers used their lives to illustrate the specialness of Jimmy. Fighting with this kind of guy whose healing ability is beyond the charts, you can't use the attitude of not fearing death like before. Other opponents may feel that it is worthless and avoid the edge for the time being, but this guy can really fight you. It would be fine if they could die together, but he can't die with this thing. A beautiful tactical block firmly blocked Jimmy's hard blow. Obviously, Anthony's weapon material is also very unusual. Suddenly, the sense of crisis in Jimmy's heart erupted violently. Without the slightest hesitation, he broke out in a flash step, and the thoughts and secret energy in his body recovered more or less. Looking at Anthony, who had distanced himself from him, a gleaming golden door appeared behind Jimmy. Next to Jimmy was a tent with oil drums. A ball of flame was thrown out by Jimmy, and Jimmy ran towards the portal without looking back. When Jimmy stepped into the portal with his last foot, a mass of dark purple energy rushed into the portal like a shadow. And the flame thrown by Jimmy was also smashed by Anthony's sword. This battle ended at the cost of the orcs losing tens of thousands of soldiers. Anthony and the orc prophet who just arrived failed to keep Jimmy, and Jimmy did not complete his task. In fact, the prophet came very late. It took a whole night to arrive here, except that the distance between the camps was relatively far, but no one went to the camp where the prophet was located for help. As a result, the battle came to an end, and the prophet had just arrived. Looking at the tragic scene around, both the prophet who had just dared to come and Anthony fell into silence. Although the camp is still there, the soldiers guarding the camp are gone. What is the difference between such an ending and destroying the entire camp? This kind of war has been fought many times. Facing the mystics of Kamatage, the old, weak, sick and disabled lineup of the Orc clan cannot be opponents. Therefore, neither Anthony nor the prophet, nor the chief and Shadowhunter next door, have any determination to fight. They all came with a casual attitude. They didn't care about winning or losing, they just enjoyed the war, that's all. Odd now, Anthony just feels like there is a flame rising inside of him. Who said that the orcs have no tactics? I want to win. Anthony spoke thus to the prophet. I want to too, but I can't win. A wry smile appeared on the prophet's ferocious face. It's nothing for Kamatage to take out a mage alone. However, a group of mages appeared in the war, and a group of mages who knew space magic appeared on the battlefield. The damage it can do is staggering. Even the night elves and humans who have the deepest research on magic have no way to compete with it. When facing Karma Taj's mage, his long-range means are almost equivalent to abolished. As for the useful silent magic and space magic, those on the opposite side are also mages. And Gu Dui's accomplishments in this area are even more unimaginable. The Book of Waishandi covers almost all white magic. Purification magic is just the most basic magic. As for space magic, Karma Taj's study of space magic is fascinating throughout the multiverse. Is a sneak attack possible? Anthony still seemed a little unwilling, and racked his brains to ask the wise man. I don't know, let's discuss it. Even if we can't win, the mage of Karma Taj must pay enough. The prophet looked at Karma Taj in the distance with deep eyes. The prophet is now angry too. Tens of thousands of soldiers were killed by one person, it really didn't give them any face. If such a thing goes out, the orcs will become a joke of the entire multiverse. I go. After stepping into the portal, what appeared before him was his dormitory again. However, the sense of crisis has not disappeared. A quick step moved laterally, and a purple wolf flew past Jimmy's ear. It really lingers. Turning over, Jimmy immediately rode on the wolf's body, clamped his legs hard, and his body suddenly fell downward. The shadow demon wolf couldn't bear the huge force and immediately fell to the ground. Raising its claws carrying high-temperature flames, and attacking dozens of times in succession, the shadow wolf turned into a part of the world, and completely disappeared in Jimmy's dormitory. I go. With some difficulty, he moved to the side of the bed. Jimmy leaned on the leg of the bed and let out a sigh of relief. The existence of the self-healing factor kept Jimmy from being injured. However, the exhaustion of physical strength is that the self-healing factor has no way to work. Jimmy now wants to go out and see if his flame is working accordingly. However, the current Jimmy is really dead, so tired. The clotted blood on his body made Jimmy feel uncomfortable all over. But even so, Jimmy, whose eyes were slightly closed, was about to fall asleep. Jimmy, I'm bringing you breakfast. Nancy's voice came in from outside the tent, and she broke in without consulting Jimmy. Forehead. What's wrong with you? The scene in front of her really made Nancy a little unbelievable. Yesterday, when Jimmy said he was busy, Nancy thought it was prevarication to herself. Nancy was sad for a long time because of this, but after seeing Jimmy like this today, Nancy knew that something was really wrong with Jimmy. I was a little happy, but more worried. Putting the food box in her hand aside, Nancy came to Jimmy's side in 2 steps. It's fine, I need some sleep now. With a strong spirit, Jimmy said in a somewhat secretive way. The current image is really not suitable for meeting people. Shall I take a shower first? Nancy asked Jimmy. No, I can go by myself when I wake up. Nancy's words immediately made Jimmy blush, but fortunately Jimmy is almost covered in blood now. Nancy couldn't see it at all. Then you sleep for a while now? Although mages like Nancy who have just started for a long time do not need to participate in frontal battles, they need to do a lot of logistical work. Well, go get busy. Jimmy also knew that Nancy couldn't really be so idle. It is good. Nancy nodded when she heard the words, helped Jimmy to the bed, and looked at Jimmy with some concern. I'm going first. Remember to eat something when I wake up, the food is on the table. Well, I see, be careful. With a thick and tired voice, it came into Nancy's ears. Although she really wanted to stay with Jimmy, her reason still made Nancy leave here. Nancy didn't like this feeling very much. In fact, Nancy is very powerful. In Nancy's class, Nancy has faintly become a rookie king. Originally, Nancy was also very confident in her own strength. However, Nancy has never hated her incompetence so much as today. If I was strong enough to fight side by side with him, then surely he wouldn't fall into this situation, right? Ji Yi looked at the orc soldiers in front of him who looked as if they had been spayed with chicken blood, and a look of helplessness flashed across his face. Ji Yi saw what Jimmy did last night. Naturally, I also know why the orcs have changed their normal behavior and become so crazy. But it doesn't matter, in Ji Yi's eyes, as long as his precious apprentice learns from it, then everything is worth it. It wasn't that Ji Yi looked down on this group of remnants and defeated generals. For Ji Yi, killing this group of orc soldiers was no more difficult than slaughtering a dog. Such a battlefield was originally created by Ji Yi to sharpen his apprentices. However, apart from Jimmy, Nancy and Wong were also spotted by Ji Yu. Time passed slowly, and the time soon came to night. And Jimmy finally woke up from his lethargy. Well, comfortable. With a sigh, Only after being exhausted can I feel how happy it is to sleep. Now Jimmy is very happy. Mystic energy and mind energy have also recovered a little by themselves, which can be felt. Compared with before, both the quality of mystic energy and mind energy have increased a little. The use of these energies is also more handy. Therefore, actual combat is the elevator of strength improvement. A purification technique was placed on his body to get rid of the disgusting dirt, and Nyan Chi poured into the martial arts suit. Soon, the dog-like Jimmy appeared in the dormitory again. When he came to the table, Jimmy saw the food box that Nancy left here. Nancy is a very nice girl. Open the food box, 1 rice and 1 steak. I don't know if Ohm has rice Jimmy in this era, but Karma Taj does. Don't spray me with these common sense questions, I'm a science student. Although a little cold, but the taste is still very good. The taste is a little salty, which is very in line with Jimmy's taste. When did this girl know my taste? Jimmy. Just as Jimmy was tasting the delicious food, a voice came from behind Jimmy. You didn't just wake up, did you? When Nancy saw Jimmy eating, a look of joy flashed in her eyes. Today's work is done. Isn't it obvious that Jimmy didn't answer Nancy's question? Oh. I'm almost exhausted. When Nancy heard this, her originally excited face suddenly collapsed. What happened? Hearing this, Jimmy put down the chopsticks in his hand, turned his chair around, and faced Nancy. Today, those orcs went crazy for some reason, and their attacks suddenly became sharper. Many senior brothers died on the battlefield. Forehead. Hearing this, Jimmy didn't know why, and suddenly felt that this matter might have a little relationship with him. Okay. Just a little bit. Look at it. How can there be undead on the battlefield? Ah. Nancy lowered her head slightly, trying not to let Jimmy see her excited eyes. He is comforting me. Comforting me. So hi, the battlefield is very dangerous, so pay attention to protecting yourself. Well, I see. Nancy nodded. Then go back to rest early after a hard day, you'll be busy tomorrow. Now Jimmy wants to send Nancy away quickly, and while there is still time, Jimmy wants to sneak in again. It is good. Upon hearing this, Nancy obediently stood up and was about to leave. No. Master Ji asked you to go there. Nancy suddenly realized that she didn't come here just to catch up with Jimmy. In fact, Jimmy's lukewarm attitude towards her for such a long time made Nancy feel a little embarrassed to come to Jimmy. The teacher is looking for me. Jimmy was slightly taken aback when he heard this, but he quickly realized it. Okay. I'll take you back first and then go to the teacher. Jimmy nodded when he heard the words, indicating that he knew. It is good. The color of joy was about to burst out from Nancy's eyes. Send yourself first. Then find the teacher. He. I am more important than the teacher. After sending off Nancy, Jimmy came to Ji. What do you think of your infiltration yesterday? Ji sat behind a coffee table and asked Jimmy. Failed. Failure is not terrible. What is terrible is to find your own shortcomings in failure. In this failure, have you found your shortcomings? Ji took a sip of the tea and asked Jimmy softly. I'm not strong enough to kill the last survivor. Jimmy thought for a while and said this to Ji. Ji really didn't expect that Jimmy would be so straightforward. The upright Ji didn't know what to say for a while. I have a kind of magic here, which is more suitable for sneaking in. Ji was silent for a long time, and put the teacup in his hand on the table. Also ask the teacher to enlighten me. Naturally, Jimmy is not the kind of person who doesn't have long eyes. When Ji said such words, he quickly clasped his fists and bowed to the end. Well, space manipulation is a must-have skill for every guardian mage. He can manipulate the surrounding space, for example, switching the ground and roof, cracking the ground, and so on. While Ji was speaking, he stretched out his hand and pointed forward. Jimmy suddenly felt weightless under his feet, and his eyes suddenly went dark. Looking up, he could vaguely see a light source, and his body continued to fall. Trying to adapt to the sense of weightlessness, a pair of wings protruded from the back of the martial arts uniform. Between flapping fans, Jimmy's figure rose slowly, and soon appeared in front of Ji again. And it was at this time that the surrounding space had returned to normal. This magic is very familiar to Jimmy. Jimmy saw it when he was watching a movie. Cassius used this trick to mess with Strange. A very typical space magic. After learning this magic, go to complete the task. Ji said to Jimmy, and at the same time stretched out his hand. A ball of light merged into Jimmy's eyebrows. A stream of information emerged in Jimmy's mind. it was the use of space manipulation. This should be a kind of soul magic, which is quite enlightening. However, there is no instant learning effect. It just saves time in lectures. I see, teacher. Jimmy nodded, understanding what GUE meant. Nancy is a very nice girl, you can teach her some magic. GUE nodded when he heard the words, and the teacup appeared in GUE's hands again. At the same time, GUE also mentioned something seemingly casually. Okay, I get it. When Jimmy heard this, a gleam of joy flashed in his eyes. Nancy, almost when she first entered Karmatage, Nancy entered her own world. To accompany, to take care of, to care about. All kinds of heartwarming actions make Jimmy sometimes embarrassed to face Nancy. There is a feeling of being unable to hold his head up, although Jimmy knows that Nancy has a purpose for him. But Jimmy was unable to satisfy that purpose, which was both happy and distressing. There is no other reason. Nancy wants to be with herself, but she already has a girlfriend. A woman who shared weal and woe with herself and experienced life and death together. Although his temper is not as good as Nancy, nor is he as caring as Nancy. However, she lacked the most important woman in Jimmy's heart in this world. None of them. Jimmy is not a sentimental person. In Jimmy's thinking, a person can only fall in love with one person. There are 72 concubines in the Sangong 6th court like the emperor. That's just a joke. Are you sure those concubines love the emperor? What they love is Mother Yi Tianxia and Wangzi Jackie Chan, right? However, Jimmy is also a person who knows how to be grateful. It is impossible for Jimmy to turn a blind eye to Nancy's devotion to herself. Although we can't be together, Jimmy will try his best to help Nancy. Like teaching Nancy something. It's a pity that Karmatage's magic teaching is very strict, and Jimmy can't teach Nancy magic at will. Because Jimmy knows that he is a very special person in Karmatage. Of course, good talent is also a very important part. Therefore, Jimmy can only teach Nancy about the skills of Emperor Wu. This is already a lot of effort. Jimmy has only taught 3 people since he came to this world. One is Victor, one is Mel, and one is Nancy. Jimmy is not as selfish as imagined. He shares life and death with his elder brother Victor, who shares joys and sorrows. Jimmy naturally gives everything to him. However, Victor, who really can't feel the energy, also makes Jimmy very helpless. Still, Jimmy taught Victor everything he knew. It's a pity that Jimmy hasn't been able to teach Victor the skills he knows now, which is a little embarrassing. In fact, Wuji's skills are quite suitable for Victor. As for Mel, Jimmy only taught 1 Iron Mountain. Anything else just wouldn't work for Mel. Wuji's skills put too much load on the body. People who don't have self-healing factors and don't know how to read chi are not suitable for cultivation. As for Nancy, Jimmy can only teach 1 flash step. This kind of skill suitable for short-distance maneuvering is also more suitable for melee mages. After all, portals aren't everything, and Karmatage's mages basically rushed up to melee. However, a flash step is not enough to make up for Nancy's devotion to herself for so long. At least in Jimmy's opinion, it's not enough. And GUE let go of his authority, so Jimmy has a lot of room to operate. Regarding the direction of Nancy's training, Jimmy already has several plans in mind based on the magic knowledge that Jimmy has not yet mastered. After bidding farewell to GUE, Jimmy went straight back to his dormitory. Jimmy already has a preliminary understanding of Ancient One in this war. Obviously, GUE wanted to improve himself in this war, so as to meet GUE's expectations for himself. To be honest, this kind of road arranged by others is very comfortable to walk, but it is also very boring. So, Jimmy decided to finish the road that GUE had arranged for him first. It's boring, but it suits me well. After all, he is the Ancient One at the level of the Heavenly Father, and Jimmy still trusts the Ancient One quite a lot. As long as you stick to the path of Wuji and walk unswervingly, it will be over. Back in the dormitory, after sleeping for a whole day, Jimmy can't sleep now. I don't want to sleep either. Cultivating this kind of thing belongs to knowing if you don't practice for 1 day, and knowing when you don't practice for 2 days. Once you enter this pit, you must continue to practice. It's about 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening now. I started to practice, but I didn't practice for too long. 2 hours of secret art training, 2 hours of martial arts training. It is simply to increase the energy of the secret technique. If it is accumulation, 2 hours of practice a day is the most suitable. After the practice, Jimmy lay on the bed, did not sleep, but began to practice the soul out of body. In the movie, Doctor Strange once used his soul to go out of his body to read books at night. This is a very good idea. Moreover, the soul out of body can be regarded as one of the basic skills of practicing the unity of man and nature. Moreover, it can also separate the practice of magic from the practice of martial arts. So, no matter what, Jimmy has to practice his soul out of his body. As for whether it is possible to separate the practice of magic and martial arts after the soul is out of the body, but let's talk about mastering it first. It is not difficult to get out of the body. Simply put, it is to separate your soul from your body. Of course, it still sounds difficult. However, Karmatage already has a whole set of operation methods for this. In this way, it is very simple. After nearly 2 hours of crumbling bedboards, Jimmy finally appeared in the dormitory in a spirit state. He didn't make any movements, just closed his eyes and rested his mind, doing everything but actually repeatedly calculating the magic knowledge in his mind. The night passed like that. In the early morning of the next day, the soul returned to the body, and Jimmy stood up refreshed. The effect is unexpectedly good. There is no feeling of fatigue, and there is no big difference from usual. In this way, you can study magic theory at night, and spend an hour during the day practicing magic. In this way, you don't have to worry about not having time for double cultivation. Touching his hungry stomach, Jimmy didn't go to cook after washing up. Instead, sit on the bed. 1, 2, 3, Jimmy, I've brought you food. Jimmy counted in a low voice in the dormitory, and when the 3 characters fell, Nancy's voice sounded on time. After getting up, smiling, and having breakfast together, Jimmy and Nancy went out together. Come here at night, there will be a surprise. Jimmy smiled at Nancy and left gracefully. Night. Nancy was left blushing. Came to the battlefield again. At this time the 2 sides have opened up the posture. The wolf cavalry of the orc clan was ready to go. The Tauren was carrying a thick, long and black stick, and soulwalkers in 2s and 3s were mixed among the Tauren, ready to treat them at any time. The flames on the crusher catapult were ready to be released at any time, and the Tauren chief stood at the forefront of the battle formation carrying a thicker and longer black stick that seemed to absorb all light. There are only about 6 mages in Karmatage, no matter how good space magic is, facing so many enemies and the interference of shaman sacrifices, Karmatage's mages must be prepared for melee combat. Are you ready? Modu came to Jimmy's side, looked at the situation ahead, and asked Jimmy with a solemn face. Although Modu made a deal with Mephisto, Modu is still loyal to Karmatage. The reason for making a deal is just to beat Jimmy. After making a lot of sacrifices, Mordo found that he still had a long way to go before defeating Jimmy. Then, it is worth considering whether to continue to do transactions. The current trading volume is already close to the warning line in Modu's heart. Now Modu is thinking about how to get rid of Mephisto's control over himself. Then, it is necessary to learn the spell that can control one's own soul. Always ready. Jimmy looked at the battle formation ahead that was ready to go, and threw out a stock with a solemn face. Trying to ease the depressing atmosphere now. It's not the same as the first day's ease, if Yi didn't make a move in such a formation. Then, these soldiers of the Orc clan are enough to bring considerable losses to Karmatage. It didn't work, and the Kodo roared, and the war began. It's still the old start, the golden portal appeared, but it was offset by the shaman sacrifice. Leading the charge is the Marauder who has been given Thunder Shield and Bloodthirst. In fact, judging from the physical fitness of these veterans, they simply couldn't bear the burden brought by the Thunder Shield and Bloodlust. Even if you don't attack them, after a while, they will fall on the way to charge because they can't bear the pressure. However, this process will cause Karmatage's formation to be broken up 7 or 8 times. Modu, you organize everyone to create a favorable terrain for me, and I will organize them alone. A flash of firmness flashed in Jimmy's eyes. Since he had promised Ancient One to become the supreme mage, Jimmy was obliged to protect the mages behind him. There is no other reason. In the near future, these mages will be his subordinates. When Modu heard this, without the slightest hesitation, with a big wave of his hand, all the mages who could use space manipulation exerted their strength one after another, the ground trembled, and a narrower and narrower passage connected each other. The widest one envelops all the orc soldiers. At the narrowest place, there is a Jimmy standing. Jimmy, with blue thunder beating all over his body, stood on the ground, his bone claws painted with platinum flames were exposed in the air. The thunder armor ensures that Jimmy will not fall down, and the existence of the platinum flame means that he has a stronger combat power without consuming energy. The shaman priests of the orc race will naturally not catch them easily. One after another cast their own magic to destroy the changed space. Purify, disperse, But how can the magic cast by thousands of people be eliminated so easily? What's more, shaman priests also need to pay attention to the portals that affect the soldier's charge. There are still thousands of mages who don't know how to manipulate space, and the logistics team has also joined them at this time. Don't ask for much effect, just keep opening the door to harass. The Tauren chief raised his head to the sky and screamed, and rushed towards Jimmy without hesitation. His seemingly clumsy figure was faster than the predator on the mount. This is a much stronger player than Anthony. Although the overall quality of veterans is not strong, their combat experience is unparalleled. There is no need at all, the formation changes, and without affecting the charge, follow the chief behind and charge forward. These are really veterans. They participated in countless battles when they were young, and after leaving the battlefield, they taught recruits for several years. They are the textbooks on the battlefield. Unfortunately, time took away their strength, so that they can only. For the tribe. The chief shouted loudly, and smashed the black stick in his hand towards Jimmy, and the powerful force caused a sonic boom. The chief's idea is very simple: kill this guy, and you can rush in. Seeing this, Jimmy naturally wouldn't take it hard, and started to dodge the blow, narrowly dodging the blow. Instant kicks. Although there is a chain of instant shadow kicks, he only kicks once, and there is no conjoined body. Specifically, it is more like Ultraman's Ultraman kick. He pointed out that there is no thought energy bonus, just pure physical strength plus the flame in the body. The platinum flying kick rushed towards the chief's face, and the chief was not weak, so the black stick parried and tried to resist. Odd numbers, he might still be able to do it for the young and powerful stone, but he is really powerless as he is getting old. At that moment, the black stick flew high into the sky. Jumping up, Jimmy caught the black stick flying into the sky and threw it back. For the tribe. At this time, the predators who had been keeping a distance from the chief finally approached Jimmy. Accumulating power, Jimmy's eyes were full of dignity. Jimmy didn't want to comment on the combat power of the predator. After all, Jimmy once defeated tens of thousands of orc soldiers. However, the cavalry who charged were different from the soldiers who surrounded them. Just when Jimmy's body was full of thunder, and he was about to resist this wave of shock, a loud shout came suddenly. "Get down!" Accompanied by it is a strong sense of crisis. Without the slightest hesitation, Jimmy lay on the ground directly. Almost at the same time, dozens of red energy rays shot out from above Jimmy. It took up almost all the space Jimmy was in. Eye of Destruction in Solatok. This magic is to import the crimson energy from the crimson universe of Solatok into the body and emit it from the eyes. Unleashing this magic requires high magical attainments. Moreover, a person in a pair of eyes can only emit 2 rays. Looking at the situation, Modu also used the shape of icon. The ray lasted for about 1 minute. This is the advantage of latitude magic: it uses the energy of others. As long as the body can resist it, it will be fine. After stopping the attack, Modu rubbed his sore eyes. Then keep an eye on the changes in the battlefield. The results were gratifying. The first wave of Marauder's charge was almost wiped out, and the Tauren's charge was also disrupted. "I am a big brother." There was excitement in Modu's eyes. "I'll leave it to you. Do not let me down." Modu looked at Jimmy's back and muttered to himself. Thunder surrounded his body, flames gathered in his hands, and Jimmy rushed straight forward. The shaman is still competing with the mages of Kamatage, and the smasher stays behind and waits to move. Countless infantry began to join the battlefield. It's a decisive battle from the beginning. Whirlwind legs. The body jumped up, and Jimmy rushed into the enemy camp with a whirlwind leg. As soon as he grabbed it, Jimmy grabbed the black stick of an unknown Tauren in half, and the flames spread to the black stick, and Jimmy threw it directly, taking away an unknown number of lives. Surrounded by heavy siege, almost no technical content is required. There are very few things that Jimmy has learned in these years that are used by Jimmy at this time. Almost grabbing it out with one paw will take away one, or even many lives. The narrow space was not enough for Jimmy to dodge, and Jimmy took all the attacks one by one. With the double blessing of self-healing factor and domineering body effect, Jimmy is like a barbarian king who has opened up, turning into a killing machine, constantly taking away all the lives within sight. Knee, elbow, Iron Mountain, smashing bones, punching knees, and whirlwind kicks. Little skills that were rarely used before were picked up by Jimmy. Being beaten, beating someone, become the main theme. What? There was a violent shout, and a gust of wind came, and Jimmy punched him hard, not showing weakness. Under the action of the force, the enemy retreated. But Jimmy, who is in a domineering state, directly chases after him. Dodge step. Hug head, chain knee strike. More than a dozen knee strikes accurately hit the bridge of the enemy's nose, and the last knee strike Jimmy let go of the enemy's imprisonment. Under the impact of the knee strike, the enemy suddenly raised his head, blood was splashed, and a beautiful landscape was drawn in the air. The bone claws protruded out, piercing the enemy's heart steadily and ruthlessly, and the high-temperature flames were also brought in. Until this time, Jimmy could vaguely see from the colorful face that this was the previous chief for the tribe. The figure turned back, the bone claws protruded, and kicked back at the same time. After taking away the first few Tauren, the chief's figure was also directly kicked out by Jimmy. The chief charged very powerfully, much more powerfully than Anthony. However, after the charge, the old man was crushed by Jimmy in terms of strength and speed. Then, the result of waiting for him is to be instantly killed by Jimmy. This is the metamorphosis of Wuji. You are not as strong as me, not as fast as me. If you are not as good as me in skills, then you deserve to be killed in seconds. Time passed by minute by minute. Before they knew it, the Tauren were gone, and before they knew it, the orc infantry were almost dead, and before they knew it, the shamans were still competing with the mages of Kamatage. Woo! A burst of horns sounded, and the orc soldiers who were fighting with Jimmy began to retreat decisively. Although the overall speed is a bit slower, it is not sloppy at all. Woo! The flashing thunder was retracted into the body, and Jimmy walked slowly towards Kamatage's camp. The originally pure white martial arts uniform turned blood red once. Suddenly, a magic hit Jimmy's body. The blood stained on the martial arts uniform disappeared like melting ice and snow. Jimmy turned around numbly, only to find that it was Modu. Good job. That is, don't look at who I am. Jimmy didn't mean to be low-key in the slightest. It's really not modest at all. Have a drink? Modu stepped forward to support the crumbling Jimmy, and at the same time persuaded the excited mages away with his eyes, and walked towards the cafeteria. Bars are not allowed on the battlefield? Jimmy asked back. Do you care? Not give a damn about. Go. The two walked towards the cafeteria together. There is no alcohol in the cafeteria, but Modu obviously has it in stock. This black guy who looks simple and honest is actually not as simple and honest as he appears. He didn't eat in the cafeteria, and things like drinking had to be done secretly. The two came to a place far away from the Kamatage camp and started a two-person world. When the two wine bottles touched, the two opened their hearts. Do you know why I am right with you? Do not know. Actually, I just want to prove that I am stronger than you, and that I am the next supreme mage. Modu said with a wry smile. Aha. But I'm giving up now, you're strong, really strong. Modu's face was full of joy in the city uniform. Thank you. Modu said a lot, but to sum it up, Jimmy is very strong and he is very good. Can you teach me the unity of man and nature? Finally, Mordo asked Jimmy. Ro. Jimmy hesitated and said there was no problem. In Jimmy's impression, Modu was still a guy with a sense of justice, not to mention that Modu had expressed kindness to himself before. Well, Jimmy is naturally willing to train a future right-hand man. Write it down, I'll go back to practice. Under Jimmy's bewildered eyes, Modu took out the paper and pen. On the way back to the dorm, Jimmy felt something was wrong. How do you feel that I am at a loss? A bottle of wine for a book of advanced magic. I go, but Jimmy didn't take this to heart. Knowledge is for learning. Eh? As he approached his dormitory, Jimmy found Nancy standing at the door of his dormitory. Why are you still waiting? Jimmy took 2 steps forward and came in front of Nancy. Didn't you say there was a surprise? Nancy lowered her head, her voice a little aggrieved. You, come in. Jimmy shook his head helplessly and opened the door of his dormitory. Turning on the light, Jimmy found paper and pen. Actually, there is nothing wrong. I just want to ask if there is any magic you want to learn. Tell me and I will teach you. Jimmy said to Nancy with a smile. This. Nancy felt a little lost in her heart. I do not know either. Nancy said this to Jimmy. Then I'll teach you the magic you need to learn next, and then you go back and think about what to learn. Jimmy began to write quickly, mirror space and out-of-body magic. These 2 magics are common, and Jimmy only wrote one name for other magics. After finishing writing, Jimmy found that Mel had been looking at him. Is there something on my face? Keeps looking at me? Jimmy joked with a smile, and taught Nancy the information in his hand. No. 2 blushes appeared on Nancy's face. Okay. It's getting late, go back and rest. Jimmy stood up, and Nancy also stood up obediently. After sending Nancy back to the dormitory, Jimmy did not return to his dormitory. With a punch, a broken hole appeared, and Jimmy walked in. Mirror space. After entering the mirror space, the surrounding things are still the same. Subconsciously, he glanced at the girls' dormitory, only to find that the entire girls' dormitory was pitch black. Long live the Ancient One. Thinking back to the various details of the corner of the sub-camp in his mind, Jimmy once again appeared under the corner of the sub-camp through a portal. A small entrance appeared, and Jimmy stepped into the mirrored space again. Seriously, I didn't even discover this magical skill of sneaking. Walking carelessly among the sub-camps full of patrol soldiers, Jimmy soon came to the place where the oil drums were stored. A portal appears, and a ball of flame is thrown by Jimmy. Intense flames swept across the entire camp immediately. However, all of this has no effect on Jimmy, and Jimmy is not in the same space as these guys now. Of course, Jimmy didn't leave either. In Jimmy's eyes, it could be seen that the orc veteran with the knife didn't seem to be dead yet. Hidden in the mirror space, Jimmy has been following this veteran. All the way outside the camp, Anthony, who was staggering, finally couldn't hold on anymore, and suddenly sat down on the ground. Anthony never expected that this time the camp would blow up without any warning. If it wasn't for the fact that he still had some hole cards, he would definitely have to fold it in this time. Looking at the subcamp burned by raging fire, there seemed to be crystals flashing in Anthony's eyes. Originally, there were not many supplies, but this time they lost a lot. Sitting powerlessly on the ground, Anthony clenched his sword hand tightly and then loosened it. Before Anthony could make up his mind, Anthony only felt weightless for a while. Glancing at Anthony, who was lying on the ground, Jimmy slowly stepped out of the mirror space. A teleportation, Jimmy returned to his dormitory. The moment he stepped into the portal, Jimmy was chic. The moment he stepped out of the portal, Jimmy was messy. He stepped out, but felt that he didn't step on anything. If it wasn't because Jimmy's balance was not bad, Jimmy would kneel in front of Gu. Sniff. Gu's nose twitched slightly. Gu Jingwubo's eyes looked at Jimmy. Drinking? Yes. Hearing this, Jimmy scratched his head and said something a little embarrassed. Write the cultivation method of the unity of man and nature on paper and spread it? Gu continued to ask. Can't you? Go back and take a good look at the canon. Gu didn't answer, but said so to Jimmy. Magic knowledge can only be taught orally, and cannot be written on any carrier without permission. Gu asked. Then I will come back with them. Jimmy has a headache. Nancy may not know this rule. After all, she is a newcomer. She has never even been to the library. Apart from arcane weapons and portals, she has no access to other magic. Mo Du must know it all. This bastard. No, I've already destroyed it for you. Gu said lightly. Thank you, teacher. Hearing this, Jimmy said this to Gu, although Jimmy himself didn't know what he wanted to thank Gu. Write down these things first, and talk about them later when you go back. Gu put down the teacup in his hand, which is considered to be a definitive statement on this matter. When Jimmy heard the words, he reluctantly agreed. Mission completed? Ancient One continued to ask Jimmy. Finished. I thought how long it would take you to discover the use of the mirror space. It's okay, not too stupid. Gu nodded. Starting tomorrow, you can follow me. Gu said so. Okay, I get it. Jimmy nodded, seeing nothing happened, and returned to his dormitory. Start to practice your core skills, harmony between man and nature. In Modu's dormitory, with trembling hands, Modu took out the cultivation method of the unity of man and nature that Jimmy gave him. What Modu wants to do is to complete the first stage of the harmony between man and nature. Let soul and body become one. In this way, Mordo can free himself from Mephisto's control. Mephisto's soul contract can only restrict the soul, but not the body. The most important thing is that now that he is in a different latitude space, Mephisto can't take care of himself at all. However, when Modu took out the paper that was supposed to be ordinary but filled with knowledge, he found that the paper turned into powder. Ruined, at that moment, Modu deeply realized what despair is. At this time, Gu was also very curious. Why did Modu want to obtain the cultivation method of the unity of man and nature? Coincidence. Gu became suspicious of Modu, and planned to take a good look at himself, the great disciple of Kaishin. I don't know if I don't see it, but I'm shocked when I see it. As Mephisto said, Gu couldn't see it unless he looked carefully. But today, Gu took a closer look. However, Gu did not move Modu, but began to plan. Since that day, Jimmy has been by Ji Yuyi's side, and for some reason, after that, the attack of the orc soldiers also slowed down. In the following days, Jimmy was always by Ji Yuyi's side. After the war, Jimmy taught Nancy to learn magic. Modu also came to Jimmy once, wanting to ask Jimmy for the cultivation method of the unity of man and nature. However, Jimmy didn't intend to give it away. The incident of Modu made Jimmy understand that the so-called plot is not static. Jimmy doesn't know if Mordo is still the jealous person in the original book. However, Jimmy, who was pitted once by Modu, did not intend to fall down twice in the pit. Under Jimmy's teaching, Nancy's strength has improved by leaps and bounds. Jimmy's oneness with nature is also making good progress. Jimmy's fame spread throughout Karmatage. Time passed slowly like this. 2 years later, the Orc clan has been defeated, and everyone just needs to repair and go home. Jimmy can also see Mel, who he misses day and night. But, today, Jimmy is working hard. Lying flat on the bed, Jimmy felt his soul. Countless times I want to try to separate my soul from my body. However, it can't be done at all. Jimmy has been practicing the second stage of the unity of man and nature for a whole year. Today is the day when Jimmy is ready to break through the second stage and complete the whole practice of the unity of man and nature. It has to be said that after practicing the first stage of the unity of man and nature, it is really difficult to let the soul out of the body. However, Jimmy has seen hope. Ji Yuyi played with the fan in his hand, and seemed to be planning something in his heart. I want to stay by your side and take care of you, will you be my girlfriend? Samus half kneeled in front of Mel, holding a bouquet of flowers in his hands, and asked Mel sincerely. Looking at Samus in front of him, Mel fell silent. In the past 2 years, Samus has made such a move many times. However, they were all rejected by Mel. Mel has always had that person in her heart. However, that person never came to find him. 2 years. Where are you? Do you have me in your heart? Ah? Give me a moment to think about it, will you? Mel said so to Samus. Although it was not agreed, Samus still had an ecstatic expression on his face. For the past 2 years, Samus has been trying. However, Samus has been rejected for 2 years. But today, Samus knew that that person's position in Mel's heart had begun to waver. Quickly put away the flowers. Samus exchanged pleasantries for a while and then left here again. But this time, the pace of Sam's departure was cheerful. Mel, somewhat distraught, went back to her house. Looking at the moon hanging high in the sky, Mel didn't know why, tears wet his eyes. Looking at himself lying on the bed, Jimmy looked at his hands. A pair of bone claws protruded fiercely, implying that Jimmy had successfully cultivated the unity of man and nature. Even if you don't look at the indestructible body of the Vajra that will be cultivated later. Just relying on the unity of man and nature, Jimmy has already stood at the pinnacle of this planet. It is unimaginable that the combination of nature and man will add to Jimmy. The role of the unity of man and nature is to allow the soul to have the ability of the body. At the same time, the strength of the body is also included. For the other cultivators, even Ji Yuyi, it is just that his soul has no fear of lightning and flames, and his body has the characteristics that can directly hit the soul. But for Jimmy, this means that his soul has self-healing factors, bone claws, and even the strength of steel and iron bones that he has cultivated for more than 5 years, and the ability to control flames. What a terrifying bonus this is. No matter what kind of enemy it is, the soul and body are asymmetrical. Even if there were, it would definitely be the handful of people standing at the top of the pyramid. At this moment, Jimmy is excited. I have to say, soul out of body palm is too buggy, isn't it? Take the Hulk as an example. With the Hulk's physical strength, even after Jimmy wakes up, it will take a lot of effort to defeat the Hulk. But what if now? Jimmy can guarantee that he can kick the Hulk's soul out of the earth. A summoning order was issued, and Jimmy hurried to Ji Yuyi's side. And the mages stationed here also assembled at this moment. Under the leadership of Ji Yuyi, they all rushed towards Karmatage. Back after Karmatage. Go see your girlfriend first. Ji Yuyi said to Jimmy very understandingly, it is good. When Jimmy heard this, a trace of excitement flashed in his eyes. A portal appears and Jimmy disappears into Karmatage. Jimmy and Modu followed behind Ji Yuyi, and Ji Yuyi stood at the highest place of Karmatage. Jimmy's departure was naturally noticed by all the mages. Among them, Nancy was naturally included. Mel. It was already the second day, and Jimmy stood at the door of Mel's office and gently knocked on the door of Mel's office. Mel was dealing with official business at this time, when he suddenly heard this familiar but unfamiliar voice. The hand that was signing the signature trembled violently. "Come in." Jimmy walks into Mel's office. Mel appeared in front of Jimmy with a teleportation. Before Jimmy could say anything, Mel had already held Jimmy's hand. The next moment, Mel and Jimmy had appeared in Mel's bedroom. It was a hard fight. Mel snuggled into Jimmy's arms. Until this time, Jimmy had time to talk about something serious. "I'm sorry. I've worked hard on you for the past 2 years. Something happened to Karma Taj in the past 2 years. We fought against the orcs in different latitudes for 2 years, and we haven't come to you. I'm really sorry." Mel didn't make a sound, just snuggled into Jimmy's arms, quietly listening to Jimmy's narration, smelling the smell of Jimmy's body, enjoying this moment of tranquility. After a long time, Jimmy stopped nagging. Jimmy has told Mel everything that happened in the past 2 years. However, Mel ignored himself, and Jimmy couldn't speak anymore. Mouth is a bit dry. The atmosphere was a little awkward. "Are you still going?" Mel asked softly. "I still have to go. I have promised the teacher to succeed the Supreme Mage." Jimmy said softly. "Oh, that's all right." Mel heard the words and said noncommittal. The atmosphere became quiet again. "Are you hungry?" Mel asked, although it was a question, but Mel had already dressed to prepare meals. Jimmy also got dressed and sat at the dining table. Soon, a steak and a glass of milk were placed in front of Jimmy. "Is it tasty?" Seeing Jimmy gobbling it up, Mel asked softly. "Good to eat." Jimmy nodded in agreement. "Well, let's break up." Half of the steak was still lying quietly on the dinner plate. Delicate forks are placed next to the plates. Mel stared at the place where there was no one with dim eyes, and was speechless for a long time. "Don't you even want to say why? Karma Taj is a very remote place." Jimmy leaned against a wall, staring blankly at the bright moon in the sky. Tears already wet his clothes unknowingly. Jimmy walked very smartly, without asking why. Didn't even speak. Portal gate and flash step activate at the same time. Jimmy was just afraid that he would make a fool of himself in front of Mel. Isn't it lovelorn? Who hasn't lost their love yet? What's the big deal? Leaning against the cold wall, Jimmy's throat choked with unknown meaning. The 3 months of being together in the Devil's Arena, the sweet scene of establishing the Alpha organization, kept popping up in Jimmy's mind. The original sweet scene seemed to turn into a sharp knife at this time, stabbing heavily in Jimmy's heart. Ah! There is a light screen in front of Gui, and Jimmy's state appears in the light screen. For Jimmy, Gui is quite concerned. Emphasis on feelings, sense of responsibility, good talent and a series of advantages. Almost the perfect candidate for the next Supreme Mage. Gui didn't want Jimmy to be devastated because of this blow. After seeing Jimmy's future, Ancient One didn't want to train Doctor Strange anymore. Relatively speaking, Jimmy, who can hold the eye of Agamotto tightly in his hand, is Gui's favorite. Just like myself, whoever starts to do things will be killed. This is what a guardian should look like. Although he didn't want Jimmy to be depressed because of this, Gui didn't wait to appear in front of Jimmy. For the sake of Jimmy's face, Gui planned to be patient. But, before again, Gui intends to find Nancy. As night fell, Nancy hid in her bed. The incident of Jimmy leaving everyone in full view during the day came to mind. Although he tried his best to persuade himself in his heart, it was a very important task given to Jimmy by the mage, and it was definitely not to find his girlfriend. But Nancy doesn't believe it. "I go. Sleep how to do. What if you want to kill that woman who doesn't know where she is?" Just as Nancy was tossing and turning, there was a knock on Nancy's bedroom door. Oh, and it's worth mentioning that Nancy was allocated a separate bedroom because of her excellent performance on the battlefield. Who? Nancy sat up all of a sudden. Even in the dark night, she was illuminated by Nancy's eyes. There is quite a look of a deeply resentful woman who finally waited until the prodigal son turned back. Ancient One. When Gui's voice came, the hope in Nancy's eyes disappeared immediately. Not Jimmy. Nancy suddenly lost motivation. Who is Gui? "I go. Ancient One." Only then did Nancy come to her senses, and quickly opened the door of her bedroom. Sure enough, he saw the familiar bald head. "Are you disappointed to find out that it's me?" Gui smiled slightly at Nancy, those eyes seemed to have seen through everything. "No. No, how could it be?" Nancy said quickly, while talking nonsense that even she didn't believe. She quickly made way for Gui to come in. "I'll show you something." Ji Yi sat on the chair in Nancy's room, stretched out his hand, and a golden screen appeared in front of Nancy. Among the influences is a dejected Jimmy. Teacher, Jimmy is. Nancy frowned, but she was very happy in her heart. Jimmy is still in Karmatage at this time. Doesn't that mean that Jimmy didn't go to find his girlfriend? Or did you look for it, but came back after just meeting him once? Can't you see? He must have been dumped. Ji Yi said in a relaxed tone. Ah. Ji Yi's words hit Nancy's weak heart like a heavy hammer. At that moment, tens of thousands of strategies emerged in Nancy's mind. What appeared on the surface was that Nancy's reaction was much slower. Did Jimmy teach you magic during this time? Ji Yi changed the subject, put away the projector, and asked Nancy these questions. Correct. Nancy's heart suddenly became uneasy. She won't cause any trouble for Jimmy, right? What have you learned? Mirror space. Nancy dared not hide it, she just said a lot of magic. To be honest, in the past 2 years, Nancy has really learned a lot of magic. In addition to the lack of arcane energy in her body, Nancy's strength is not weaker than the guardian mage in the Three Saints Temple. What did you learn? If you want to be by Jimmy's side and help him fight, then you should learn this. Ji Yi said something very ironic. At the same time, Ji Yi pressed a beam of light into Nancy's eyebrows. Time is running out, and there are some things that Ji Yi can't care about foreshadowing. Just make things easier. Ji Yi, who is the pinnacle of the Earth's combat power, has the confidence to do so. Look good. Ji Yi released the projection again, and Jimmy's figure appeared again in the projection. Nancy looked at Ji Yi in astonishment, only to find that Ji Yi was no longer there. Slightly taken aback, Nancy subconsciously looked at the projection, only to find that Ji Yi had already appeared in the projection. What happened? Ji Yi stood beside Jimmy and asked Jimmy softly. Huh? It's okay. The sudden voice made Jimmy slightly taken aback. The insignificant thoughts disappeared in a flash, helping Jimmy wipe away the tears on his face. The head can be broken, the blood can be shed, and the face cannot be lost. If Ji Yi sees his appearance just now, he won't see anyone in the future. Just kill yourself. It's okay. What are you doing here if you don't sleep at night? Ji Yi continued to ask. Ji Yi naturally knows that he can't ask anything, but Ji Yi doesn't need to ask anything. Just chat a few words and let Nancy understand Jimmy from another angle. I like the moon today. Jimmy looked left and right, and didn't care if the reason was far-fetched. Anyway, that's what he said. By the way, Ji Yi doesn't think he wants to steal books, does he? It's pretty close to the library. So free. Go back and have a rest, and come to me tomorrow. To Jimmy's surprise, Ji Yi believed it. This, so deceitful? Peeved. Nancy couldn't help laughing out loud. Nancy really didn't expect Jimmy to have such a side under his cold and powerful appearance. So cute. That's right, Jimmy left Nancy with a strong and cold impression during this time. In the early morning of the next day, Jimmy came to Ji Yi. It is very difficult for ordinary mages to meet Ji Yi once. It was also because of his status as a big disciple that Modu was able to follow Ji Yi all the time. However, for Jimmy, wanting to meet Ji Yi is not as simple as drinking water. Are you afraid of pain? The Ji Yi in the early morning is still the Ji Yi in Jimmy's impression, wearing a light yellow mage robe, with a folding fan on the tea table, but he himself is holding a teacup in his hand, tasting slowly. However, unlike the previous openings, the words spoken by Ji Yi today are so thoughtless. Are you not afraid? Jimmy organized his words carefully. Ji Yi smiled inexplicably, gently put down the teacup in his hand, stretched out his hand, and the surrounding space was shattered inch by inch. Jimmy and Ji Yi appeared in the mirror space at the same time. I'm afraid you haven't looked carefully at the indestructible body of Vajra? Ji Yi turned his back to Jimmy and said lightly. Forehead. Jimmy was at a loss for words. It was indeed the case. In order to prevent himself from being too ambitious, Jimmy didn't look carefully at the steel and iron bones. Originally, I planned to talk about the indestructible body of the Vajra after I finished practicing the unity of man and nature. But I didn't expect that Ji Yi would ask such a question on the second day after he finished practicing the unity of man and nature. In other words, how did Ji Yi know that he didn't see the indestructible body of King Kong? The doubts in Jimmy's heart didn't last too long, and Ji Yi quickly answered for Jimmy. With a wave of his hand, an invisible force appeared, and Jimmy's body floated in the air uncontrollably. A mass of liquid, silver-white unknown object rolled and appeared in front of Jimmy. Jimmy is very strong, and his self-healing ability is very strong. Now Jimmy's self-healing ability, after years of strengthening Nyanki, is much stronger than the self-healing ability at its peak in the original book. It is an existence that can forcibly resist the fire of the phoenix. However, this does not mean that Jimmy is not afraid of pain and cannot feel pain. Even ordinary iron has a melting point of 1538 degrees Celsius. What's more, this is a rare metal carefully selected by Gu. That's right, Jimmy already knew what the Ancient One wanted to do. This is to help oneself cultivate the indestructible body of the Vajra. I go. Relax, it won't hurt very much. Gu chuckled softly, and seeing no movement from Gu, the ball of liquid began to pour into Jimmy's body. What? There were people cleaning and tidying up the house in Gu's main hall, but no one could hear the hoarse screams. In one word, it hurts. 2 words, it hurts to death. Jimmy felt what he had felt again. Do not feel more comfortable than ever. In the past, it was just pain at the soul level, but today, it is indeed a double torture of soul and body. Ow. While Gu manipulated the alloy liquid into Jimmy's body, he listened to Jimmy's screams in a daze. In the end, I couldn't bear it anymore. The free hand waved slightly, and Jimmy could no longer transmit the sound. Due to the double tasking, the hand controlling the alloy liquid couldn't help trembling. What? Jimmy's screams became more intense, but Gu couldn't hear them anymore. But at this time, Nancy rarely practiced with everyone. After learning from the painful experience, Yan Ran found that Master Gu was still very supportive of her pursuit of Jimmy. Such a discovery made Nancy jump with joy. It just so happened that Jimmy broke up with his original partner. It still looks like he was dumped. Tut tut. Is that girl blind? Even though she thought so, Nancy also knew that she needed to become more useful. That's right, after Gu's teaching, Nancy understood a truth. I am not the same as Jimmy, although Karmataj's magic inheritance is a melee mage. However, senior mages still rely more on magic. And if one wants to become a high-level mage, even with Nancy's fairly good talent, it will take at least 10 years. After all, Nancy's talent can only be said to be not bad. Not a born wizard like Dr. Strange. Even for Dr. Strange, it took 6 years for him to grow up enough to fight Thanos. And Jimmy, now fully confident and jewel-free Thanos' hard steel once again. Complete Jimmy who is indestructible. If Dr. Strange is a born mage, then Jimmy is a born warrior. The fighting power is strong, and Nancy wants to catch up with Jimmy, which has to be said to be a dream that needs to be pursued for a lifetime. So, Nancy has to go another route, and Ancient One gave Nancy such a way. The Book of Visander contains all white magic. Gu passed all the auxiliary magic in it to Nancy. The purpose is to create a perfect support for Jimmy. Dr. Strange Gu didn't want to let it go, and Gu also had a rough plan for the direction of Dr. Strange's training. In short, Gu is trying his best to perfect his retirement plan. People who are obsessed with cultivation are scary, especially those with goals like Nancy. The time was spent practicing until an alarm sounded. Once, when Jimmy was not around, Mel would dislike him, hate him, and resent him. Dislike him for not being with me. I hate that he doesn't come to find me. Resent him for not caring about himself. However, when Jimmy really left, Mel found that he still loves Jimmy. Sometimes, some things can only be cherished more when they are lost. Do you think he will come to me again? Mel sat on the bed with her knees hugged and said silently. Mel stepped down as leader of the Alpha organization and handed that position to Samus. It's not because of the relationship between the two, but because Sams is currently the strongest in the organization. Do you want him to come to you? Kyle sat beside his sister, hugged her waist, and said softly. When he left, he didn't even ask a question, and he didn't even look sad. Do you think he never loved me? Mel didn't answer Kyle's words, but spoke to himself. At this time Mel has fallen into her own world. Mel had a lot to say, but couldn't find anyone else. Can only find Kyle. There used to be a Jimmy's. Or is it called Logan? Ah. Mel really wanted to find Jimmy and asked him if he ever loved her. However, Mel couldn't find where Jimmy was. In fact, even if Mel knew where Jimmy was, he wouldn't go there. If you are depressed, write down everything in your heart, and I will keep it for you. The screams gradually subsided, and the metallic liquid exuding high temperature also disappeared. Jimmy's figure was also lowered. In just 2 hours, Jimmy passed out 20 times. However, the extreme pain bought Jimmy's powerful strength. A pair of claw bodies shining with metal light, the two iron claws collided with each other. Sparks appeared at the point of collision. Teacher, what are the ingredients of these alloys? Jimmy looked at his paws, and he could see that there were some almost invisible lines on the paws. Jimmy, who has practiced incarmatage for so long, naturally knows that this is a magic pattern. In other words, the alloy in his body has been enchanted. Ulu metal is the main body, and vibration gold is added. Yi heard the words and said softly, Ulu metal? Jimmy was shocked when he heard the words. In Jimmy's impression, this Ulu metal is much more powerful than Zhenjin and Edmund metal. The Ulu source metal comes from the rare metal mines in the dwarven kingdom of Nid Wheel. In addition to being hard, this metal can also be enchanted. It may not be intuitive to say this, so let's give a few examples. The Destroyer of Asgard, the Hammer of the Hammer God, and the Thunder Axe that almost killed Thanos are all made of this metal. This is almost the best metal, not to mention there is Zhenjin that can force the esteem to split, 50-50. With these, there are few people in the universe who can make Jimmy's self-healing factor work. The things in God's domain have previously dismantled Odin as a destroyer. Yi said lightly, Teacher, you are amazing. Jimmy said without hesitation when he heard the words, and at the same time questioned the magic inscription on his paw. Teacher, what is this? The gift I gave you, you can crack it yourself. Yi heard the words and said lightly. During the war against Azeroth, the guardian of the New York Temple, Mage William, died in the hands of mysterious forces. Now that the New York Temple is unguarded, you fill this vacancy first, and when the situation stabilizes, you will be punished when you come back. Yi said to Jimmy. Who did it? Yi really doesn't know. After all, when it happened, Yi was still beating the orcs in Azeroth. However, Yi is not interested in knowing. Just throw this matter to Jimmy. If he can't even do this, Yi will definitely kill Jimmy himself. Teacher, do you know who did it? Jimmy doesn't really like to use his brain very much. If Yi could know, then he could relax a little. Do not know. But it's hard to complete it when you don't know anything. Without any information, Jimmy naturally wants to get more benefits. I'll kill you if I can't finish it. Yi looked into Jimmy's eyes seriously, and said these words seriously. Forehead. When did Yi become so irritable? Jimmy thought to himself. And Yi's idea is that if you use my resources, if you can't even do this well, Nancy and Wong will accompany you. Before I choose the next guardian of the New York Temple, the New York Temple will be handed over to you to guard. Yi said so to Jimmy. Okay, I get it. Jimmy nodded when he heard the words, indicating that he understood. Walking out of Yi's main hall, Jimmy ran to the library immediately. Jimmy now needs to figure out what the magic inscriptions on his body are for. A gift from Yi to himself. What gift? Yi didn't say anything, nor did he tell himself how to use it. Then Jimmy will have to find it himself. This is the case with magic inscriptions. If someone else makes it, you can't use it unless they tell you how to use it. However, there is another way, and that is to find a way by yourself. Although it was a bit difficult, Jimmy didn't care. Jimmy's character is quite suspicious. Even if Ancient One told him how to use it, Jimmy would find the answer by himself. Otherwise, it is easy to suffer from insomnia. Of course, Jimmy didn't mean to find the answer in the library. Instead, he took a few books and went to find Nancy and Wong to go to the New York Temple together. Nancy was practicing white magic in her own room, and Jimmy's sudden visit made Nancy a little confused for a while. I thought it was because Jimmy wanted to be with him after breaking up with his girlfriend. While thinking about how to hold Jimmy to show that he is not a casual person, after hearing Jimmy's intention, Nancy's eyes lit up instantly. Let's guard the New York Temple together. I love you, Ancient One. What? Unlike Nancy, Wong felt bad after hearing the news. He actually wanted to guard the New York Temple with this violent maniac? Well, Wong is still very happy. It is an honor to be sent out to guard the temple. However, going to guard the New York Temple with Jimmy makes Wong very unhappy. Because Wong has always felt that he is not weaker than Jimmy. Even if he failed last time, Wong thought it was just his own carelessness. In fact, Wong has been studying magic in Karmatage since he was a child, and it has been going on for an unknown number of years. Arcane energy can increase the lifespan of a mage. Even if Jimmy and Modu were by Gu Yi's side, Wang didn't feel bad about it. Because, Wang and Modu have fought against each other, and there are winners and losers, and they are evenly matched. Therefore, in the king's thinking, he should guard a temple with himself as the master. Wang believes that he has such strength. What? Don't want to. Jimmy's fist made a kaba kaba sound. Wang looked at the fist that was close at hand, and a constipated expression appeared on his face. At such a close distance, he couldn't avoid it, and Wang was more convinced of Jimmy's ability to enter the battle. The scene in the different latitude where one person is in charge of the gate and 10,000 people can't open it also proves Jimmy's strength. Therefore, in Wang's heart, Jimmy is a little better than himself. But is Wang the kind of person who fears power? Go. The temple cannot be without a guardian, let's go quickly. Wang said to Jimmy with an upright face, and strode towards the temple. Tisk. Looking at Wang's back, Jimmy let out an exclamation of unknown meaning, exchanged a smile with Nancy, and followed quickly. Karma Taj is located in the Himalayas, thousands of miles away from New York. However, this is not a problem at Karma Taj. In the supreme sanctuary of Karma Taj, there are 3 gates and a big ball. The big ball can watch every inch of the world. The 3 gates can lead to New York, London and Shangjiang respectively. But this time, what Jimmy and others are going to is the New York Temple. New York Temple. The New York Temple, as the name suggests, is a temple located in New York. Jimmy and others appeared directly in the New York Temple. The space is large, with 2 floors. First floor living room plus kitchen. Bedrooms and armory on the 2nd floor. It's spacious and comfortable to walk in. Go and pick a magic weapon that suits you. There are many magic weapons in the armory on the 2nd floor. Now that Jimmy has become the guardian of the temple, Jimmy has the final say on the arsenal. Among the 3 people present, only Nancy did not have a magic weapon of her own. Who killed the guardian mage here? Wang asked Jimmy. The guardian mage was killed, which is a big event. Do not know. Any clues? Wang Wenyan was stunned for a moment, but it was reasonable, so Wang continued to ask. No. Then what shall we do? Wang was shocked. He didn't know who did it, and he didn't have any clues, so what else to investigate? Wash and sleep. Really no clue? Well, not really. The time is simply too long. What happened a year ago, and a year ago, Kamataj's army was still fighting Azeroth in a different latitude space. Had it not been for the existence of the other 2 temples, the New York Temple might have been leveled. Let's have dinner first. Jimmy heard the words, thought for a while, and said so. Forehead. Wang's eyes widened. If Jimmy was not his own, Wang really wanted to shoot Jimmy's dog's head with the eye of Salatok. Go and buy us something to eat. Jimmy looked at Wang. To tell the truth, Jimmy was completely dumbfounded after being teased by Gu Yi for a long time. Now Jimmy, continue to replenish energy. As for the murderer? Don't rush this moment. What? Looking at Wang standing in front of him and stretching out his hand, Jimmy was a little dazed for a moment. Money. Wang's speech was brief but purposeful. We came here as a group. Since we are a group, we must help each other. I have no money with me. Wang interrupted Jimmy's chatter. If I am a little bit, I will give it to you. Wang's words made the smile freeze on Jimmy's face. Then what shall we eat? Wang suddenly became ill. When he came here, he didn't even have the startup capital. Even Wang himself didn't realize that his attention had been drawn to the issue of eating. Well, I'm going out to make some money. Jimmy thought for a while, and walked out of the gate of the New York Temple. There's never a shortage of money-making opportunities in New York, when your fists are big enough. It was already dark when we came out of Karma Taj, and now it is even darker. There were no streetlights on the streets in this era, but the kerosene lamps exposed from the surrounding houses vaguely illuminated the streets. Jimmy, who was dressed in a white martial arts uniform, was walking on the road, his 5 sensitive senses carefully sensing the surrounding environment. Yes, Jimmy just wants to fight criminals. In this day and age, it's easy to come across something like this. Soon, Jimmy returned to the New York Temple with a bunch of delicious food. At this time, Nancy had already picked out her magic weapon, which was a staff, and Nancy, who was sitting in the living room, was playing with it with love. When she heard the gate of the temple being opened, Nancy looked subconsciously, only to find that it was Jimmy who came back with food. Nancy immediately put down the staff in her hand to meet Jimmy. I don't know if it's an illusion, but this scene gave Nancy a feeling that Jimmy went out and exchanged a day's labor for this sumptuous dinner. And I clean up the housework at home, waiting for my husband to come back. What did you buy? At this time, Wang's voice sounded from behind Nancy, breaking Nancy's illusion immediately. It's a pity that there is a fat black man. Hamburger. Jimmy lifted the bag in his hand, and threw a stack of dollars on the table by the way. Contrary to Jimmy's expectation, the local black society is quite rich. Come on, Nancy. Jimmy handed Nancy a hamburger, and Nancy happily took it. This era has hamburgers. It's just different from the later generations, that is, the meat is mashed, and it's okay to sandwich it with 2 slices of bread. But no matter what, at this point in time, it's good to eat something. I'll cook tomorrow. Nancy looked at Jimmy, who was eating very unhappy, and said silently on the side. You still cook? Jimmy glanced at Nancy in astonishment. To be honest, this burger is really bad. A burger without ketchup is soulless. Of course. Nancy likes to show her strengths in front of Jimmy. What a coincidence, I will too, let's be together tomorrow. Jimmy nodded upon hearing this. Hey, what should we do next? Nancy seemed to want to say something more, but was interrupted by Wang's voice. I don't know why, but Wang knows that these things can be discussed later. However, Wang just couldn't see these 2 people getting bored. Nausea. Do you have any suggestions? Jimmy took a big bite. Although it was unpalatable, Jimmy needed these calories. There are no clues, not even corpses. New York is so big and there are many extraordinary people. This is a very difficult thing. Wang thought for a while and said, this is indeed a very difficult thing. How about we ask? Although it's been a long time, someone should remember it. It seems. You can ask the other 2 guardians of the temple what they should know. Nancy on the side said thoughtfully. Ah. Jimmy nodded seriously. King. Go ask the guardians of the other 2 temples. Nancy, please give us a list of all the dark forces in New York. I remember that the temple seems to have relevant information. You can sort it out and give it to me the day after tomorrow. Jimmy said to the 2 of them. How about you? Naturally, Nancy would not say such a sentence. This sentence was said by Wang. Me? Waiting for Nancy to sort out the information, I will take the list and visit one by one. Jimmy said lightly. If there are no clues, then there is no need for clues. If the other 2 guardians of the temple knew something, Jimmy would go straight to destroy them. If the guardian mages of the other 2 temples don't know, then Jimmy will ask them one by one. What should I do if I am indecisive? Let's talk rationally first. Anyway, for Jimmy, it is not a big problem to penetrate the whole New York. Moreover, Jimmy also needs to integrate the underground forces in New York. Ordinary Jimmy doesn't want to care about it, but those existences whose combat power exceeds the limit of ordinary people need to have a code of conduct. Jimmy hopes to harmony.